Mafia boss refused to leave his mistress. While his wife was in labor, she vanished with his son. He didn't forget. He knew. At 6:47 in the morning, while his wife screamed through labor in a Manhattan hospital, Adrian Voss was lying in a Sicilian villa, listening to the Mediterranean breathe through open glass doors. His lieutenant's voice broke through the phone. "She's delivering now, sir. The baby's coming," and Adrian looked at the woman sleeping beside him, at the white sheets, at the sea outside, and said two words that would cost him everything he never knew he had. Not yet. He set the phone down. He poured himself a drink, and 5,000 miles away, Evelyn Voss pushed their son into a world where his father had already made his choice. If that had been your husband, your family, what would you have done? If this story already has your blood running hot, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now and follow this story all the way through, because what happens next will shake you to your core. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, and something underneath both of those things that Evelyn could not name, something raw and animal and specific to the particular terror of being alone, in a place you were never supposed to be alone in. She had been there since 4 a.m. She had driven herself. That was the part nobody at the nurse's station said anything about. But she saw it in the way the intake nurse glanced at the empty passenger seat of her car when Evelyn walked through the sliding doors, her overnight bag over one shoulder, her face composed in that way she had practiced for years, the way that said, "I have this handled," even when she absolutely did not. Room 412 had 2 chairs, one for the patient, one for someone who mattered. Evelyn sat in the patient bed and looked at the second chair for a long time before she stopped looking at it. Her sister Mara arrived at 5:15, breathless and wearing mismatched shoes because she had dressed in the dark. She burst through the door with a gas station coffee and a bag of peanut butter crackers, and her eyes were already wet before she even reached the bed. "I came as fast as I could," Mara said. "My phone was on silent. I'm so sorry. You're here," Evelyn said. "That's enough." Mara pulled the second chair close and sat down and took Evelyn's hand and did not let go for the next 2 hours and 47 minutes. She did not ask where Adrian was. She already knew where Adrian was. Evelyn had told her 3 days ago, her voice flat and steady as she described the photograph Adrian on a terrace in Palermo, the light golden and forgiving, his hand resting on the lower back of a woman in a white dress whose name Evelyn had learned within 20 minutes of seeing the image. Celeste Romano, 31 years old, connected to a Romano family from Catania that had old, ugly ties to the kind of business Adrian had spent 7 years trying to wash clean. Mara had gone very still when Evelyn told her. The kind of still that meant she was choosing her words the way you choose which wire to cut. How long, Evelyn had asked her. Mara didn't answer immediately. Evelyn's voice was quiet, not angry, quieter than angry. "How long have you known something was wrong?" "I suspected," Mara said. "I didn't know." "There's a difference." "How long?" 2 years. Mara pressed her lips together. "Maybe 2.5. There were things he canceled on you so often, Ev. And the way he talked about the Sicily expansion, it was always she stopped. Started again. I didn't have proof, and you were pregnant, and I thought if I was wrong, I would have destroyed your marriage over a feeling." Evelyn had sat with that for a moment. "You weren't wrong," she said. She hadn't cried then. She didn't cry now, in room 412, as the contractions came harder and closer together, and her body did the brutal mechanical work it had been preparing to do for 9 months. She breathed. She squeezed Mara's hand until Mara's knuckles went white. She did not cry. At 6:31 her obgyn, Dr. Patricia Shen, told her it was time to push. At 6:47 M. Nolan Adrian Voss arrived in this world already screaming, fists clenched, face scrunched into pure outrage at the indignity of being born. Evelyn laughed. It surprised her the sound that came out of her, wet and broken and real. She laughed because he was so angry, this tiny furious person, and she held him against her chest and felt his heat and his weight and his impossible aliveness, and the laugh became something else halfway through. She did not look at the empty chair. She looked at her son, and something inside her, some coiled, waiting thing that had been holding tension for years released, not dramatically, not with some grand internal announcement. It just went quiet, like a sound you've been hearing so long you forgot it was there, and then it stops. And the silence is so loud it takes your breath. Her marriage did not end with a scream. It ended with a decision she hadn't quite made yet, but could already feel the shape, The way you feel the shape of a door in the dark before your hand finds the handle. She had met Adrian Voss at a charity auction 7 years ago, which was the kind of sentence that sounds like the beginning of a fairy tale until you know what kind of man runs charity auctions as a business strategy. He was 36 then. She was 31. He was the most controlled person she had ever been in a room with, not cold, exactly, but precise, measured. He listened to people in a way that made them feel like they were the only person in the building. And then he remembered everything they said, and 3 weeks later, he would reference something small and specific, the name of your dog, the city your grandmother was from, and you would think he actually cared about that. Evelyn had been too smart for that trick almost. Almost. What got her wasn't the attention. It was the work. She was running a small financial compliance firm at the time, making decent money, helping mid-sized companies audit their internal controls. Adrian had hired her firm to consult on the restructuring of 3 of his legitimate subsidiaries, a commercial real estate company, a logistics operation, and a private equity arm that needed cleaning up before an acquisition. She had walked into his boardroom expecting a man who would mansplain her own job back to her. Instead, he had sat across from her with a single sheet of paper, her preliminary assessment, which she had sent the day before, and said, page 4, "You flagged the vendor payment structure. Most people miss that. Most people aren't paid to miss it," she'd said. He had smiled, just slightly, like she had confirmed something he wasn't sure of. They were married 11 months later. Looking back, she could see the architecture of it, how his attention had been a form of intelligence gathering, how his generosity had a transactional logic underneath it, how the version of himself he showed her in those early months was a curated performance, not a lie exactly, but a selection. He gave her the parts of himself that were true. He just withheld the rest. The rest being the Voss organization was not simply a collection of legitimate businesses. It had legitimate businesses the way a river has a surface. Yes, the surface existed, yes. It was real. But it was also the least significant part of what was moving. She hadn't known everything when she married him. But she wasn't naive either. She had known enough to know that some of his business relationships operated in places where legal was a relative term. She had told herself that the work she was doing, the compliance structures, the documentation, the clean corporate architecture she was building around his holdings, was making things more legitimate, not less. That her presence was a net positive. That the good you could do from the inside was more than the good you could do from the outside. That was the story she had told herself. For 7 years, she had been an excellent storyteller. Adrian called at 9. 22 a.m. Nolan was sleeping in the bassinet beside her bed. Mara had gone to get real food. The room was quiet in that particular post-emergency way, everything rung out and still. She looked at his name on her phone screen for 4 rings. Then she answered Evelyn. His voice was careful. She knew all his vocal textures by now, the business voice, the social voice, the intimate voice, and this one, which she thought of as the management voice, the one he used when a situation required containment. "How are you? How is he?" "He's here," she said. "He's healthy." Pause. "I'm glad." Another pause. She waited. "I had a situation develop," he said. "The Palermo discussions became it escalated in a way I couldn't walk away from. I want you to know that if I had any choice—" "What's her name?" Evelyn said. Silence. "The woman in the photograph," Evelyn said. "The one from Sicily. I know there was a photograph because Mara sent it to me 2 days ago. I've known what it meant since before you left. So you can save yourself the business situation explanation. More silence, a different kind. The kind where a man is rapidly recalculating." "Evelyn, I'm not angry right now," she said, and that was the truest thing she'd said all day. "I'm actually remarkably calm. My son was in 3 hours ago, and he has your eyes, and he's perfect, and I am sitting here, holding it together, and what I want from you right now is just the truth. Not your version of the truth. The actual truth." She heard him exhale. "Her name is Celeste Romano," he said. "How long?" Another hesitation. 14 months. Evelyn absorbed that. 14 months. She had been pregnant for 9 of them. She did the math without wanting to. "You're going to come here," she said. "Not today. I need today. But tomorrow. You're going to come and sit in this room and tell me what this actually is, and then we're going to figure out what comes next." "Okay," he said. The word came out smaller than she expected, like he had been bracing for something louder and didn't know what to do with quiet. "Adrian," she kept her voice level. "Don't be late." She ended the call. She set the phone face down on the blanket. She looked at Nolan, who was doing that particular newborn sleeping that looks like the person is practicing for something more serious. I'm going to figure this out, she told him. He did not respond. His fist was curled loosely near his face, and his chest rose and fell with a rhythm that had nothing to do with the complicated world he'd been born into. She called Julian Mercer next. Julian was her attorney had been for 5 years, originally retained to handle business contracts, then kept on for broader counsel as the scale of her work with Adrian's companies grew. He was 62, lean and deliberate, the kind of lawyer who made his money by knowing which questions to ask before other people knew what they were asking. I need to begin a quiet process, she told him when he answered. Very quiet. Nothing filed yet, nothing triggered. But I need you to understand where my assets are, what I control, and what protections exist for me if I need to move quickly. Julian did not ask her why. This was why she had kept him. I'll need 48 hours to get a full picture, he said. Can you give me that? I can give you 72, she said. Come to the hospital day after tomorrow. Day after tomorrow became tomorrow. Adrian arrived at Mercy General at 2 in the afternoon, carrying a bracelet in a flat blue box sapphires and diamonds, something obscenely expensive, the kind of gift that functions as an opening negotiating position in a conversation. The buyer hopes will never get specific. He had come. She gave him that. He was there, in a charcoal suit that looked like he'd put it on in an airport, jaw tight, eyes scanning her the way he scanned a room looking for exits, for threats, for the thing he couldn't see yet. He looked at Nolan for a long time before he looked at her. Something moved in his face when he looked at the baby, something that wasn't performance. She saw it, noted it, filed it. He set the box on the bedside table. She did not look at it. Sit down, she said. He sat. She watched him pick up the conversation the way you pick up a live wire carefully, committed to the idea that if you just hold it right, it won't burn you. I owe you more than I can say, he started. That's not why I asked you here. Evelyn, tell me about Victor Dane, she said. That stopped him. Victor Dane was Adrian's chief financial officer, his oldest institutional ally, the man who had been inside the Voss organization since before it was the Voss organization. He had been there when it was still Adrian's father's enterprise, still operating in the gray spaces of post-recession New York. He had outlasted 3 restructurings, 2 near-federal indictments, and the death of Adrian's father. He was 61 years old and had the specific quality of stillness that comes from decades of surviving things that killed other people. Why are you asking about Victor? Adrian's voice had changed. The management register was gone. This was something more careful, because when I was going through the Q3 subsidiary reports last month, there were 3 accounts I couldn't reconcile. I thought it was a reporting lag, but when I mapped them against the vendor history Julian gave me, the pattern was older than a lag, much older. Adrian was very still. How much older, he said. At least 4 years. She let that land. Victor has been rerouting liquidity inside your legitimate holdings. Small amounts, consistent intervals, the kind of thing you only see if you're looking at 5 years of data at once rather than quarter by quarter. She paused. I wasn't planning to bring this up this way, but you asked me for honesty. Adrian stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for what felt like a full minute, and she watched his reflection in the glass, the way his jaw worked, the way he pressed one fist against the window frame. Precise, controlled physicality of a man, choosing not to put his fist through something. Did you tell Julian? He asked without turning. He knows I flagged irregularities. He doesn't have the specifics yet. Don't file anything yet. I wasn't planning to. She kept her voice even. Adrian, come tomorrow. Come, and we'll go through the documents together. And then we'll talk about Celeste. And then we'll talk about Nolan. And we'll do this in the right order. He turned from the window. He looked at her. He looked at Nolan. I'll be here at 10, he said. I'll be here, she said. He was not there at 10. At 9:48, he texted, situation in the downtown office. By 11 at latest. At 11:33, he texted, this may take the afternoon. Tonight, she did not respond. She called Mara. Is your car outside? She asked. Downstairs. Why? I need you to bring it to the service entrance. I need you to call downstairs and ask for a wheelchair in about 20 minutes for a patient transfer. Tell them it's routine. Mara was quiet for 3 seconds. How much are we bringing? Everything Nolan needs. Leave everything else. The gifts? Evelyn looked at the flat blue box. The bracelet inside that Adrian had calculated would soften her. The orchid arrangement from his assistant. The cashmere blanket in ivory, because Adrian did not know that Evelyn had already bought Nolan's blanket 6 weeks ago. On a Tuesday afternoon when the city was gray and she had ducked into a small shop on Amsterdam Avenue and found a soft blue knit square that cost $14 and smelled like cedar from the shelf it had been sitting on. The blue blanket was already in the bag she had packed up for herself. "The gifts stay," she said. She called Julian from the car, Nolan strapped into the infant seat that Mara had installed while Evelyn was still checking out. Mara driving with both hands and her mouth shut the way she drove when she was scared. "I need the fastest legitimate path to relocate," Evelyn said. "Not hide, relocate. Paper trail intact, taxes current, nothing that looks like flight. But I need to be somewhere Adrian's people aren't looking." "Connecticut House?" Julian asked. Too obvious. He knows the Connecticut House. "I have a colleague in Philadelphia. She handles exactly this kind of transitional situation. Discreet, solid. She has a network of furnished apartments that don't run through any registries Adrian would have access to. Call her. I'll have something by tonight." The city moved past the car windows. Midtown giving way to the tunnel, giving way to the expressway. Nolan slept through all of it. Mara drove north for 20 minutes before she said anything. "He's going to look for you." "Yes," Evelyn said. "Are you scared?" Evelyn thought about it, honestly. The way she had always tried to think about things, without sentimentality, without editing herself toward whatever answer, felt more comfortable. "A little," she said. "But less than I thought I'd be." "Why less?" She looked at her son in the mirror, his small chest rising. His fists unclenched now, loose, open, trusting the world in the pure, unexamined way of someone who had not yet learned it had teeth. "Because I finally made the decision," she said. "I've been making it in pieces for 2 years. Now it's made." She turned back toward the road ahead. "The decisions I've made from fear have never served me. The ones I've made from clarity have." Mara nodded. She didn't say anything else. They crossed the George Washington Bridge at 3:17 p.m. And Evelyn Voss, who would, by tomorrow afternoon, begin going by Evelyn Vale again. Her name before a marriage she had entered honestly and exited on her own terms, did not look back at Manhattan's skyline in the side mirror. She was looking forward. She was thinking about Victor Dane and the accounts she couldn't reconcile. She was thinking about the pattern that was older than a lag. She was thinking that the most dangerous thing she had seen in 7 years inside Adrian's world was not the men with guns, or the offshore structures, or the federal attention that moved around the organization like weather. The most dangerous thing was a patient man with access to everything, waiting for the right crack to split the whole thing open. She was thinking about what that man might do when he found out she was gone. And she was thinking that she needed to understand his plan before he understood hers. Adrian returned to Mercy General at 4:45 p.m. Room 412 had been cleaned. The bed was stripped. The orchid arrangement sat on the windowsill. The flat blue box with the sapphire bracelet was centered on the bedside table, untouched. The bassinet was empty. He stood in the doorway for a long time. His lieutenant, a man named Garrison who had worked for him for 11 years and had never seen him lose composure in any operational context, watched from the hall. Adrian walked to the bed. He put his hand on the stripped mattress. He looked at the bassinet. Then he looked at the table. The gifts were there. The blue baby blanket, the soft $14 one he had noticed, folded in Evelyn's bag, cheap and small and clearly chosen, was not. He understood what that meant. He understood it completely. He sat down in the second chair, the one Mara had occupied, the one Evelyn had presumably stared at for hours while she labored alone, and he sat there in his charcoal suit, and he looked at the empty bassinet, and he did not move for 11 minutes. Garrison stood in the doorway and said nothing. There was nothing to say. Adrian finally stood. He straightened his jacket. He picked up the blue box without opening it and held it for a moment, and then he set it back down. He walked to the window and looked at the street below, the ordinary terrible noise of the city. Taxis and pedestrians, and a delivery truck blocking traffic, while someone leaned on their horn. "Find her," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled. "Almost nothing." Quieted. "No pressure. No approach. I want to know she's safe." Garrison nodded and left. Adrian stood at the window. He had built an organization on the principle that nothing and no one could disappear from him if he chose to look. He had resources and contacts and networks that extended into 14 cities and 4 countries. He had found people who did not want to be found before. He had found them, and he had resolved the situation. But standing at that window, looking at the city that Evelyn had grown up in, that she knew as well as he did or better, he felt for the first time the specific texture of looking for someone who was not hiding from fear, someone who was simply done. Those were the hardest to find, because they did not run in panic and make mistakes. They moved in straight lines toward somewhere else. They didn't look back. They didn't call to explain themselves. They didn't need him to understand. They were just gone. And in the empty room behind him, in the careful silence, Evelyn had left no note, no confrontation. Nothing so dramatic as a scene was the message she intended. He had been given one more chance. He had chosen the Empire. The result. He left the sapphire bracelet on the bedside table. He thought about the accounts she had described, the pattern that was older than a lag, the name she had said, Victor Dane, with the specific flatness of someone who has known a thing for a while and is only now saying it out loud. He pulled out his phone. He called Victor. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Victor Dane, who called back within 20 minutes regardless of the hour, regardless of the situation, regardless of what else was happening. Victor, who Adrian had trusted with everything, for 30 years did not call back. Not that night, not the next morning. And in the silence of that unreturned call, something cold moved through Adrian Voss, something that was not grief and not anger, but more fundamental than either. The particular chill of a man who has just understood that the disaster he is standing inside is significantly larger than he thought, and that the ground directly beneath his feet has not yet been tested. He did not sleep. He sat in his office on the 43rd floor with the lights off, and the city below him and the phone in his hand, and he thought about Evelyn's voice on the phone that morning. The pattern was older than a lag. Much older, and he thought about Victor, and he thought about Sicily, and he thought about a man patient enough to wait 4 years, and he thought about what a man like that would need to complete his play. He thought about Evelyn's name on the corporate documentation for 6 of his legitimate subsidiaries. He thought about what her signature was worth. He thought about where she was tonight with his newborn son. And for the first time in 30 years of operating in a world where he had always been the most dangerous thing in the room, Adrian Voss felt something he did not have a practiced response for. He felt afraid. Victor Dane called back at 6:14 in the morning. Adrian was still at his desk. He had not slept. The city below had cycled through its nighttime grammar, the 2 a.m. quiet, the 4 a.m. delivery trucks, the first gray suggestion of dawn that made everything look provisional. And he had sat through all of it with a glass of bourbon he had barely touched, and his phone face up on the desk in front of him. When it rang, he let it ring twice. A small thing, but deliberate. Victor had made him wait 14 hours. Victor could wait 2 rings. "Where have you been?" Adrian said when he picked up. "Sleeping." Victor's voice was unhurried. That particular quality, he had the quality of a man who had never once in Adrian's memory sounded like anything was wrong. "My phone was off. I was told it was personal, not operational. I gave myself the night. My wife left the hospital with my son. I heard." A pause that contained nothing Adrian could read. "I'm sorry, Adrian. That's a hard thing." The accounts, Evelyn flagged. Silence. Not the silence of a man caught. The silence of a man deciding how to respond to something he already knew was coming. "What account specifically?" Victor asked. She described a pattern in the Q3 subsidiary reports. Rerouted liquidity, small, consistent, 4 years of it. She mapped it against the vendor history. Adrian kept his voice level. He was watching his own reflection in the dark window glass, across the office, watching the face he showed the world and checking it the way a pilot checks instruments. Steady. Readable as nothing. "She told me before she left. I've been sitting here all night thinking about why she would tell me that in that particular moment. She was upset," Victor said. "People say things when they're upset. Evelyn doesn't say things when she's upset. She says things when she's finished deciding." Adrian picked up the bourbon glass and set it down without drinking. "She was telling me to look. She was pointing me at something and trusting I'd eventually figure out what I was looking at. And what do you think you're looking at? I don't know yet." A lie. He was beginning to know. He just needed Victor to keep talking. "That's why I'm calling you." "Run a full audit," Victor said smoothly. "If there are irregularities, we'll find them. I'll have my team start today." "Your team?" "My finance people, yes. The same people who manage the accounts in question." Another silence. Longer this time. "Adrian." Victor's voice shifted slightly. Not much. A half degree of warmth dropping out. "You've had a brutal 48 hours. Your wife just left with your newborn son. You're running on no sleep and bad information from a woman who has every reason right now to destabilize you. Let me do my job. Let me look at the numbers. That's what I'm here for." Adrian said nothing for a moment. "Of course," he said finally. "Start today." He ended the call. He sat with the phone in his hand and thought about the specific phrasing Victor had used. Destabilize you, not upset you, not hurt you. Destabilize. The vocabulary of an operational threat assessment, not a personal conversation. He thought about the fact that Victor had known about Evelyn, leaving before Adrian told him. He had said, I heard. Not what happened, not is she okay? He had known, and he had let Adrian tell him anyway, and he had listened to Adrian describe it as if hearing it fresh. Garrison knocked and entered at 6:30 with coffee and a folder. She crossed into New Jersey yesterday afternoon, Garrison said. GWB mid-afternoon, after that the trail goes soft. She's not using credit cards under the Voss name. She has a burner or she's using cash. Julian Mercer. Her attorney, yes. He called his office twice yesterday evening from a number we traced to a payphone in Philadelphia. She's in Philadelphia. Possibly. Could be misdirection. She's smart enough for misdirection. Adrian took the coffee. Don't push. I told you I want to know she's safe, that's all. No approach. Garrison nodded, started to leave. Garrison Adrian looked up. Who told Victor that Evelyn left the hospital? Garrison stopped, turned around slowly. I made 2 calls last night. You and the senior staff briefing. Victor was on that briefing. He was. Okay. Adrian turned back to the window. That's all. Evelyn had not slept either, but she had slept in the way of new mothers in the 40-minute increments that Nolan's hunger allowed, coming up from each one disoriented and dry-mouthed, reaching automatically for him, before she was fully conscious, her body already operating on its new primary logic, before her brain had finished booting up. The apartment Julian's colleague had arranged was on the 3rd floor of a converted row house in West Philadelphia. It smelled like fresh paint and someone else's laundry detergent. The furniture was clean and deliberately impersonal, the kind of space designed to be inhabited without leaving a mark. Mara was asleep on the couch with her jacket still on. Evelyn sat in the small kitchen with Nolan against her shoulder and her laptop open, and the documents Julian had couriered that morning spread across the table. She had 6 legitimate corporate structures in her name. Not nominally actually in her name, with her as a named officer or controlling shareholder, because 7 years ago Adrian had structured it that way for tax reasons and had trusted her legal knowledge to manage the compliance side. At the time it had been practical. She was already doing the work. Her name on the documents made sense. Now those 6 structures represented something else. She moved through the documents carefully, Nolan's weight warm against her chest, his breath slow and damp against her collarbone. She flagged the accounts she had already identified and then ran a secondary search through the records. Julian had pulled 5 years of consolidated financial statements for the parent holding company. The pattern she had described to Adrian was real. She had not exaggerated it, and she had not misread it. Someone had been siphoning small amounts never enough to trigger automatic compliance flags, always varied enough to avoid establishing a mathematically detectable rhythm through vendor payment accountants in 3 of the 6 subsidiaries she controlled. The payments moved into a shell structure she almost missed. It was good work, genuinely sophisticated, the kind of construction that took years to build correctly and looked, on any given day of examination, like a normal transaction. But she had not looked at any given day. She had looked at 5 years, and across 5 years the shape was unmistakable. She pulled up a fresh document and began building a timeline, not for Adrian, for herself. She needed to understand the sequence before she could understand the purpose, and she needed to understand the purpose before she could understand what came next. The first routed payment was dated 4 years and 3 months ago. She cross-referenced it against the organizational chart Julian had included. Victor Dane had joined the senior finance team 4 years and 4 months ago, inheriting oversight of the subsidiary accounts as part of a restructuring that Adrian had personally approved. 1 month after taking that oversight. 1 month. She sat with that for a while. Nolan made a small sound against her shoulder. Not distress, just presence. Just the involuntary announcement of being alive. She adjusted him slightly and kept reading. Julian Mercer arrived at 10. He was carrying 2 coffees and a leather briefcase that had seen enough difficult conversations to have its own opinions. He sat across from her at the small kitchen table and looked at the documents she had spread out and then looked at her face and said nothing for a moment. You didn't sleep, he said. I slept 40 minutes here and there. The baby? He's fine. Mara has him. She turned the laptop toward him. Look at this timeline. Julian looked. He took off his reading glasses and cleaned them and put them back on and looked again. That's not an accident, he said. No, Victor Dane. Yes. Julian sat back. He was quiet in the particular way of a man who is rapidly recategorizing a situation, who had come in prepared for a divorce proceeding, and was now looking at something that required a different set of tools. How much? He asked. Total extraction over 4 years, my estimate, not audited, somewhere between 11 and 16 million. Spread across 3 subsidiaries, 140 individual transactions. She paused. But that's not the main thing. What's the main thing? The main thing is that the accounts he's been routing through are the ones I control. My name is on the officer documentation. My signature authority covers these accounts. She looked at him directly. If someone were going to make a move on Adrian's legitimate holdings, if someone wanted to force a transfer or seize control, they would need either my cooperation or my signature. Julian's face changed, just slightly. The professional composure held, but something behind it shifted. He needs you, Julian said, or he needs to make me irrelevant. She turned the laptop back toward herself. Those are the 2 options. Either he finds a way to get my signature on documentation that transfers my interests, or he finds a way to have me removed as a named officer, voluntarily or otherwise. Evelyn Julian leaned forward. If this man knows where you are, he doesn't yet. Yet, she agreed. Which means I have time, but not a lot of it. Julian set his coffee down and looked at her across the table and said what she had been waiting for him to say, the thing she had already known he would have to say eventually. We need to involve federal investigators. I know. This is I know, Julian. She kept her voice calm. I've been thinking about the same thing since 4 in the morning. The question isn't whether to involve them. The question is timing and what I bring to the table when I do. You bring 6 corporate structures and 4 years of financial documentation. And Adrian, Julian went still. If I go to federal investigators alone, I'm a witness in a financial crime case. Useful but limited. They'll take the documents and work the case from the outside in. She reached across the table and tapped the timeline she had built. But if Adrian cooperates, if he comes in voluntarily with full access and a willingness to testify about the organizational structure, then we have the whole picture. Victor's construction collapses. The shell structures are identified. The full 4 years of extraction is documented. And the people Victor was ultimately building toward, whoever his end beneficiary is, they surface. You want to bring Adrian in as a cooperative witness. I want to give him the chance to be one. She held Julian's gaze. Those are 2 different things. Julian was quiet. You left him yesterday, he said finally. Yes, you took his son and disappeared. Yes. And now you want to contact him. Not to reconcile, her voice was flat and clear. Not to forgive anything. To propose an alliance. Because the man who's been systematically undermining his organization for 4 years has my name on 6 corporate documents. And the fastest way to protect Nolan is to help take Victor Dane apart completely. She closed the laptop. Adrian is many things. Some of them are genuinely terrible. But he is not stupid. And right now he's the most motivated person in this situation to see Victor destroyed. I'd rather use that than ignore it. Julian picked up his coffee, drank, set it down. I'll need to be present for any communications between you 2, he said. Of course. And we document everything from this point forward. Everything. He nodded slowly. I'll make a call this afternoon. There's a federal prosecutor I've worked with financial crimes, organized crime adjacent, someone who will understand the scope of what you're bringing. He stood up. Evelyn, this is going to get worse before it gets better. I know, she said. Victor will find out you're moving against him. He will. And when he does. I know, she stood too. She was a full head shorter than Julian and looked, in the thin morning light of the borrowed kitchen, like someone who had been awake for 36 hours and was choosing not to let that show. That's why we move fast. Victor Dane sat in the back of a town car on the way from his Upper East Side apartment to the Voss building and made 3 calls. The first was to a man in the finance department, one of his people, not Adrian's, who confirmed that the audit request Adrian had triggered that morning had been contained. Redirected. The relevant files would show clean by afternoon. The second was to a woman named Celeste Romano, who was no longer in Sicily and who picked up on the first ring. Called me, Celeste said. Her voice was flat. This morning. He knows about the accounts. He suspects about the accounts, Victor said. There's a difference. What exactly did he say? He didn't. He called to tell me about Evelyn leaving. He sounded. She paused. He sounded like he was holding himself together with both hands. Good. Victor watched the city move past the car window. A gray October morning, the kind of light that made everything look like an old photograph. And the documents Evelyn controls? She has them. Julian Mercer, couriered something to her last night from the Philadelphia office. Victor was quiet for a moment. Philadelphia, possibly. Find out for certain. He kept his voice pleasant, unhurried. She has the documentation, which means she already understands the structure. We'll need to move the timeline forward. How far forward? Significantly. He looked at his reflection in the car window. She can't be running loose with that information for more than a week, ideally less. Victor Celeste's voice had an edge in it. She has a newborn child. She just left the hospital. I'm aware of when she left the hospital, Celeste. Still pleasant, still unhurried. I'm not suggesting anything dramatic. I'm suggesting that she needs to understand the reality of her position before she does something that benefits nobody. He paused, including herself. Celeste said nothing. Make the call to her sister, Victor said, not threatening. Informational. I want Evelyn Vale, and she'll be going by Vale again. Watch for it. I want her to understand that staying hidden is a temporary condition. He ended the call. The third call was to an attorney Victor, retained for situations that never appeared in any organizational chart. A man who handled things that needed handling, without documentation, without witnesses, without the particular inconvenience of a paper trail. I need eyes on a property in Philadelphia, Victor said. Furnished apartment, probably a sublet, arranged through a private attorney's network. The tenant is a woman, 30s, with a newborn. She'll be using her maiden name. He gave the relevant details. He ended the call. He looked at the gray city outside and thought about Adrian, sitting in his office on 43, running on no sleep and wounded pride, believing the biggest problem in his life right now was a wife who had disappeared. Poor Adrian. He had always been the kind of man who looked at the fire in front of him and missed the one behind. Mara's phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. They had both been careful about unknown numbers since yesterday, but something made her pick up. Some instinct she couldn't name. Ms. Vale, not a question. A woman's voice. Precise and unhurried. This call is not a threat. Please don't hang up. Mara's hand tightened on the phone. She walked to the bedroom and pushed the door closed. Through the wall she could hear Evelyn talking to Nolan, in the low, steady voice of someone narrating their own actions to a person too small to follow the plot. Who is this? Mara said. My name is Celeste Romano, a beat. I think you know who I am. The air in the bedroom went strange. Mara sat on the edge of the bed. You have 2 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't hang up right now, Mara said. Because I'm trying to warn your sister. Another beat. Longer. I made a serious mistake getting involved with Adrian Voss. I made a worse mistake getting involved with the people around him. And I am telling you, right now, that the man who orchestrated the situation in Sicily, who made certain Adrian was there, and who made certain the photograph was taken, and distributed that man knows where your sister is. And he does not intend to let her simply walk away with documentation that can expose him. Mara's breathing had changed. She could feel it, the involuntary shortening, her body responding to what her brain was still processing. Victor Dane, Mara said, silence on the other end. Not a surprise-eyed silence. A confirming one. Your sister already knows, Celeste said, which means she's smarter than any of us gave her credit for. But knowing and being safe are 2 different things. Why are you calling me? Mara's voice was controlled, but her hand was shaking. Why not call Evelyn directly? Because your sister would ask me the right questions, and I'm not ready to answer all of them yet. Another pause. I'm calling you because I want someone in that apartment to understand the urgency. Victor has people looking for her. He will find her. He is patient and he is careful, and he has been building this for 4 years. And he is not going to let a woman he considers a minor obstacle stand between him and what he spent 4 years constructing. You said she's a minor obstacle, and then told me she has documentation that can expose him. Yes. And something shifted in Celeste's voice, something that sounded briefly like respect. She's a minor obstacle who has become a significant problem. Those are 2 different categories, and Victor is only beginning to understand which one she actually is. Mara stood up. She went to the window. What do you want from this call? For your sister to move faster than she's planning to. Whatever she's building, whatever play she's setting up, she has days, not weeks. Possibly less. A pause. I'm sorry, for what it's worth, I genuinely am. I didn't know in the beginning what I was being used for. By the time I understood, I was in deep enough that getting out looked worse than staying. Problem, Mara said. Her voice was not unkind, but it was not soft either. I know, Celeste said. I know it is. The call ended. Mara stood with the phone pressed against her sternum and breathed. Then she opened the bedroom door and walked into the kitchen where Evelyn was nursing Nolan at the table, with the laptop open in front of her, and said, "We have a problem." Evelyn listened to the full account without interrupting. When Mara finished, Evelyn sat for a moment with her hand flat on the table. "Called you," Evelyn said. "Yes, not me. She said you'd ask the right questions." Evelyn looked at Nolan. He had fallen asleep mid-feeding, the specific boneless collapse of a person who has exactly zero concerns about anything. She resettled him and thought about Victor Dane, knowing where she was. Thought about the calculated intelligence of using Celeste to deliver the warning, because it was a warning, not a threat, which meant it was designed to produce panic and movement, to flush her out of cover and into a hasty decision. Good. It was also, she realized, the first clear mistake Victor had made, because it told her something she hadn't confirmed. Until this moment, Celeste Romano was not fully committed to Victor's operation. She had just broken protocol. Whether from guilt or from self-preservation or from something more complicated, she had broken from the plan. And a crack in the structure was a crack. "Call Julian," Evelyn said. "Tell him we need to accelerate the federal contact." Evelyn. "And we need Adrian." She looked up at her sister. Her eyes were steady. Clear, not frightened. "I need to talk to him. Today." Mara stared at her. "You've been gone 48 hours. "I know. He's going to listen," Evelyn said. "Because he's sitting in his office right now, realizing that Victor Dane has been playing him for 4 years, and the only person who can prove it and build a case that actually dismantles Victor's structure is currently sitting in a borrowed apartment in Philadelphia that Victor already knows the location of." She reached across the table and closed the laptop. "Adrian needs me," she said. "That hasn't been true in a long time. Right now it's the truest thing in this situation." She looked at Mara steadily. "Call Julian. I'll make the other call myself." Mara looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to set terms," Mara said. "Yes. He's going to push back. Let him. And if he doesn't agree?" Evelyn looked down at Nolan, sleeping in the crook of her arm, entirely elsewhere, existing in the pure present tense of someone who had no past and no future and no agenda, only the warm insistent now of being alive and held and fed. "Then I go to the federal investigators without him," she said. "And he finds out what it costs to be on the outside of the only alliance that can protect him." She stood up slowly, careful with the baby, and walked toward the window. The Philadelphia afternoon was gray and unremarkable. Someone across the street was arguing with a parking meter. Kid on a bike cut between 2 parked cars without looking. Ordinary, oblivious life. She looked at it and felt, underneath the exhaustion and the fear and the particular grinding alertness of someone who had not slept properly in 2 days, something that was not quite confidence, but was the shape of it. She had always been the one who saw the whole board. She had spent 7 years choosing not to act on it. She was done choosing that. She dialed Adrian's direct number, the one that bypassed his assistant, the one only 6 people in the world had, and she listened to it ring, and she thought about what she was about to do and whether it was wise, and arrived at the conclusion she always arrived at when she examined a decision from every angle and ran out of alternatives. It was not wise. It was necessary, and sometimes those were the same thing. Adrian picked up on the second ring, Evelyn. His voice was raw in a way she had not heard before. Broken. Just stripped. Like something had been removed from it. "Tell me he's okay." "He's fine," she said. "He's sleeping." She heard him exhale. A long, shuddering release of breath that he probably didn't know she could hear, that probably embarrassed him, that she filed away as the first genuinely unguarded thing she had witnessed from him in longer than she could measure. "I need to meet with you," she said, "not to come back, not to forgive anything. I need 48 hours of your complete attention and your complete cooperation. And in exchange, I will give you the only path that ends with Victor Dane in handcuffs instead of in your chair." "Silence, he said. "I've known pieces of it for weeks. I have the documentation now. I understand the structure." She kept her voice even. "He needed the photograph from Sicily to create a crisis in your organization. He needed you weakened and distracted and separated from me. He needs my signature on 6 corporate documents to complete the transfer. He has been building this for 4 years. And he is close enough to the end that he is already taking risks. He made contact with me through Celeste, which means he's trying to accelerate my timeline and push me into a mistake. Celeste called you. She called Mara. She's breaking from him. That's useful, but it's also a complication." She paused. "Adrian, are you listening to me?" "I'm listening. I'm going to federal investigators, with or without you. With you, the case is complete, and Victor's entire structure collapses. Without you, the case takes years, and Victor has time to disappear the money and rebuild somewhere else. A beat. I'm giving you the choice because you are Nolan's father, and because I am not interested in punishing you. I am interested in ending this completely. But I need your answer today, not tomorrow. The silence on the line stretched. She waited. She was good at waiting. Adrian said, "Tell me where you are." "No," she said. "Tell me you agree to my terms." Another silence. Shorter. "What are your terms?" "I make the decisions about how we approach the investigators. I control the documentation. You answer every question they ask you, completely, including questions about operations that implicate you personally. You take whatever that costs you." She kept her voice level. "And Nolan stays with me, full custody, no contest." The silence this time was different. Not the silence of calculation. The silence of a man arriving somewhere. He had been heading for a long time without knowing it. "Okay," Adrian said, just that. One word. Smaller than anything she had expected and somehow larger. "I'll have Julian contact your attorney," she said. "We'll set a meeting for tomorrow." Evelyn. His voice caught slightly. Does he look like, he has your eyes," she said. "He's going to be fine." She paused. One beat. "So are you. But not because things will be easy. Because you're going to do the hard thing for once." She ended the call. She stood at the window. Outside, the kid on the bike had come back around the block and was doing it again, cutting between the parked cars without looking, fearless in the way of someone who had not yet been shown what consequences feel like when they arrive. She watched him until he disappeared around the corner. Then she turned back to the room, to her sister coming through the kitchen doorway, with her phone already in hand, to the borrowed apartment that smelled like someone else's life, to the sleeping weight of her son against her chest. Tomorrow she would sit across from her estranged husband and a federal prosecutor and begin the work of dismantling 4 years of Victor Dane's careful construction. Tonight she fed her son and did not sleep, and read the documents again from the beginning, looking for everything she had missed, because in situations like this, the thing you missed was always the thing that mattered most, and she intended, for once in her life, to have missed nothing. She was still reading when the text came through on Mara's phone at 11:47 p. A number neither of them recognized, a message that contained no words, only an address. Their address. This address. Victor already knew. The text sat on Mara's phone screen for 11 seconds before either of them moved. Evelyn read it once, then again. The address was correct down to the apartment number. 3rd floor. West Philadelphia. The row house, with the fresh paint smell and the impersonal furniture, and the window that looked out over the street where the kid on the bike kept cutting between parked cars without checking for what was coming. She set Nolan down in the portable bassinet, carefully, with hands. She made sure he was settled before she straightened up. "How long ago did this come in?" she asked. "Just now." Mara's voice was barely above a whisper. 11:47. "Pack the bag," Evelyn said. "Everything Nolan needs first. Then your things. You have 8 minutes." Evelyn, Mara. She was already moving toward the laptop. 8 minutes. She called Julian. He picked up on the 3rd ring, groggy, his voice thick with interrupted sleep. She gave him the address text in 6 words. She heard him come fully awake, the sound of sheets, of feet hitting a floor. "Get out of that apartment," he said, working on it. "I need you to call your federal contact tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." She was pulling the documents off the table and stacking them into the leather portfolio he had brought that morning. "Tell them I have 4 years of financial documentation on a Voss organization insider, and I'm prepared to cooperate fully. Tell them I need a secure meeting, not a field office, and I need it within 24 hours. It's midnight, Evelyn." "I know what time it is, Julian." Pause. "I'll make the call and call Adrian. Tell him the timeline moved." She ended it. She looked at the apartment, the borrowed furniture, the other person's life, and did a fast, methodical sweep. Documents in the portfolio. Portfolio in the bag. Nolan's blanket, the blue one, folded on top of everything. She picked up the bassinet and carried it to the door. Mara came out of the bedroom with both their bags over one shoulder, moving fast, her mismatched shoes energy back but tighter now, compressed into something functional. "Where are we going?" Mara asked. "I don't know yet." Evelyn shouldered her bag, picked up Nolan, somewhere we weren't before. They were out the door in 6 minutes. They drove for 40 minutes without a destination. Mara drove. Evelyn sat in the back with Nolan and the portfolio on her lap and her phone in her hand and watched the Philadelphia streets give way to the suburb sprawl and then to the particular American nowhere of highway interchanges and chain motels and gas. Stations lit up against the dark like small declarations of existence. 12:40 Julian called back. I reached her, he said. His federal contact was a woman he'd mentioned her once before, a name Evelyn hadn't retained. She's interested. She already knows the Voss organization peripherally from a separate investigation that stalled 2 years ago. She said, if you have what you're describing, this conversation is overdue. When? Tomorrow afternoon. 2 o'clock, she'll send a location. Tell her it needs to be somewhere without a record. No field office, no federal building, I told her. She suggested a private conference room at her attorney colleague's office. Clean, not associated with any ongoing case. Good. Evelyn looked out the window at the dark highway. And Adrian? His attorney answered. Adrian's been awake. He's been making calls of his own. A pause. His attorney said he's been pulling internal financial records all night. He wants to bring something to the meeting. Evelyn absorbed that. Okay, she said. Evelyn, I need you to prepare for the possibility that when you sit down with Adrian tomorrow, you're going to learn something about the scope of his organization's activity that changes how you understand the last 7 years. She looked at Nolan. He was awake now, not fussing, just looking at her with the uncritical attention of someone for whom all faces were equally astonishing. I've been preparing for that for 2 years, she said. She ended the call and told Mara to take the next exit. They found a motel 7 miles off the highway. Cash. Mara's name. Room on the ground floor near the exit. Evelyn set Nolan down and sat on the edge of the bed and opened the portfolio and kept reading. She did not sleep. The meeting was in a law office on the 17th floor of a building in Center City, Philadelphia, that had no particular relationship to anything a commercial real estate firm on the directory. Conference rooms available for rent by the hour, the kind of space that existed specifically because sometimes people needed a room that wasn't anyone's room. Evelyn arrived first. She had changed into the one clean set of clothes. She had packed dark slacks, a gray sweater, flat shoes. Her hair pulled back. She looked tired. She looked precise. She sat at the conference table with the portfolio in front of her and a coffee from the lobby cart and waited. Julian arrived at 1:40 with a woman Evelyn had not met but recognized immediately as someone who carried institutional authority the way certain people carried their height without effort, as a simple fact of how they occupied space. She was 50-something, trim, dark hair shot through with gray, a suit that was good without being expensive. Margaret Holt, the woman said, and shook Evelyn's hand with the kind of grip that tells you someone has been shaking hands in rooms like this for 30 years. I appreciate you moving quickly. I didn't have a choice, Evelyn said. Margaret sat down, looked at the portfolio, looked at Evelyn. Tell me what you have. Evelyn opened the portfolio and began. She was 15 minutes in the shell structures identified, the timeline laid out, the rerouting mechanisms explained in the specific vocabulary of someone who had built compliance architecture for a decade when the door opened and Adrian walked in. He looked like he had aged 4 years in 4 days. His jaw was unshaved. His eyes were clear, but there were new lines around them that Evelyn did not recognize, or perhaps she had not been looking for them before. He was carrying a flat case, the kind for documents, and he sat down across from her without looking at her directly, which she noted. He looked at the portfolio, at Margaret, at the table. Adrian Voss, Margaret said. Not a greeting, an identification. Yes, he said. You understand this conversation is informal and exploratory at this stage. I understand. And you're here voluntarily. I'm here because my wife called me. He said it simply. No performance. He looked at Evelyn finally. She was right about the timeline. Victor moved last night. He set the document case on the table and opened it. He filed an emergency petition this morning through a Delaware holding company to initiate a forced transfer of 3 of the 6 subsidiary structures Evelyn controls. The filing was made at 7 a.m. It references a personal loan agreement between Evelyn and the holding company that doesn't exist. The room went quiet. He forged documentation, Julian said. Yes. Adrian's voice was flat, and he's been planning to. Because the filing includes a supporting letter from an attorney in my organization I've known for 9 years, attesting to the legitimacy of the loan agreement. He paused. Her name is Diana Marsh. She's been with the Voss legal team since before I took over from my father. She handles compliance documentation for the same subsidiaries Evelyn controls. Evelyn looked at the filing Adrian slid across the table. She looked at Diana Marsh's letterhead. She looked at the signature. She had worked with Diana Marsh directly. She had trusted her work. He has someone inside your legal team, Margaret said. He has had someone inside my legal team. Adrian said for an unknown period of time. Diana Marsh is Victor's attorney, not mine. Set the document down. She picked up her coffee, set it down without drinking. She looked at the filing again and followed its logic, the fake loan agreement, Diana Marsh's attestation, the Delaware holding company that would receive the transferred assets. Clean. If she hadn't already been in contact with Julian, if she hadn't already been building the counter documentation, if she had woken up this morning in the Philadelphia apartment without any preparation, the filing would have landed on her as a legal crisis, requiring immediate response, requiring her to engage with the very legal framework Victor controlled. It would have flushed her out. It would have put her on his terms. He knows I was already moving, she said. Yes, Adrian said. The text last night. He sent the address not to scare me out of the apartment. He sent it to tell me he was filing this morning. To give me the night to panic. She looked up. He wanted me reactive. He wanted you in a lawyer's office this morning, responding to the petition, instead of sitting here. She held his gaze. It was the first time she had looked directly at him since he walked in. He looked back. Something passed between them that was not forgiveness, and was not warmth, and was not anything that had a clean name. Something more like two people in a burning building who have stopped arguing about whose fault the fire was. Who else does he have? Margaret asked. I don't know yet, Adrian said. Diana Marsh, I confirmed this morning. There may be others. I've been in this organization my entire adult life, and I am telling you honestly that as of last night, I don't know which 5% of the people around me are working for someone else. Margaret looked at him steadily. You understand that statement, in this context, is the beginning of a very long conversation about your own culpability in how that organization operated. I know, Adrian said, and you're prepared for that conversation. I'm here, aren't I? Margaret turned to Evelyn, the 6 subsidiary structures. Your name, your signature authority, your compliance documentation. I need to understand exactly what Victor can and cannot do with the forged loan agreement if we don't move to block it today. He can initiate the transfer process, Evelyn said. He cannot complete it without my signature or a court order. But the petition buys him time. It creates a legal dispute over the assets that freezes their normal operation and puts a Delaware court in the middle of it. A Delaware court where he almost certainly has relationships. How long to get a blocking order? Julian? Julian had his phone out already. If we file a fraud claim against the petition today, with the documentation Evelyn has on the shell structure, and the 4-year financial timeline 48 hours, maybe less. Petition is thin. Victor moved fast because he had to, and fast work is sloppy work. Margaret nodded. She looked at Adrian again. I'm going to need everything. The organizational structure, the financial architecture, your relationship with Victor Dane from the beginning. Not the version you've told other people. The actual version. The actual version includes things that will result in criminal exposure. For me personally, Adrian said. I know. I'm not asking for immunity. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her assessment. Evelyn could see it. The slight recalibration of a professional who has been told people will cooperate and rarely actually believes it until the moment they do. Let's start from the beginning, Margaret said. They were in that room for 4 hours. Evelyn listened to Adrian talk about his father's organization, about the transition of control, about the years of deliberate restructuring, about the legitimate businesses and what they had been used to launder, and how and for how long. She listened to him describe Victor's role, not just as a financial manager, but as an architect, the man who had designed the structures that made the dirty money disappear cleanly, who had understood the legal mechanics of the operation better than Adrian himself. She listened to him describe how Victor had, over the course of years, quietly positioned himself as the indispensable link between the criminal infrastructure and the legitimate surface. How every deal that cleaned money, every acquisition that transformed illicit cash into corporate equity had run through Victor's hands. And then she listened to him describe something she had not known, something that made her sit very still. Victor Dane had been present at the founding of the Voss organization, not as an employee, not as a recruit. He had been there at the beginning because he had been her father-in-law's attorney long before he was anything else. He had helped structure the original operation. He had been, in a meaningful sense, the man who taught the Voss family how to do what they did. And for 30 years he had been patient. He never intended to work for your family, Margaret said. She was making notes, her handwriting fast and minimal. He intended to own it. Yes, Adrian said, I understand that now. And the Sicilian expansion, the Romano connection. Adrian paused. Evelyn looked at him. The Romano family in Catania, Adrian said slowly, has been doing business with the Voss organization since before I took over. The Sicily expansion was Victor's idea. He brought the Romano contact. He facilitated the introduction. He stopped. He introduced me to Celeste. The air in the room changed. Evelyn felt it, the specific atmospheric shift of a revelation, arriving that reorders everything that came before it. Introduced you, she said, at a dinner in New York. 18 months ago, he described her as a business contact from the Romano side. He said she had useful connections for the Sicily negotiation. Adrian's voice was careful, controlled in the way of a man describing something that is costing him something to describe. I didn't know who she was beyond that. She wasn't just a business contact, Evelyn said. No. He looked at the table. I know that now. I knew it 3 months in, but I told myself it didn't change the business relationship. He stopped again. I was wrong about a lot of things. Victor engineered the affair, Margaret said. He engineered the circumstances. What I did with those circumstances was my own choice. He said it flatly. No self-pity. No qualification. I'm not blaming Victor for that. I'm not asking you to. Margaret made another note. But the Sicily photograph, the timing, the fact that it reached Evelyn while you were there and she was approaching her due date. Victor knew her medical schedule, Evelyn said. Everyone looked at her. She had known this in theory. Celeste had implied it in the warning call to Mara. But saying it in this room, with Adrian across the table and a federal prosecutor taking notes, made it land differently, made it concrete, made it a thing that had happened, not a thing she suspected. He had access to my medical schedule, she said again. He knew when I was due. He knew the window. He timed the photograph for maximum impact, maximum disruption. He wanted Adrian in Sicily when Nolan was born. He wanted the marriage in crisis. He wanted me destabilized, and Adrian weakened and the organization in disarray. She looked at Adrian. He manufactured the worst moment of our lives because it served his timeline. Adrian's face was doing something she couldn't fully read. His jaw was tight. His hands were flat on the table. He was looking at her with an expression that was somewhere between the thing a person feels when they understand the full scope of their own catastrophic failure and the thing a person feels when they understand they have been used. He used my worst instincts, Adrian said. He didn't create them, but he made them profitable. The sentence landed in the room, and nobody spoke for a moment. Margaret set her pen down. She looked at both of them. I need you both to understand what we're building toward. Victor Dane is not going to stop. The Delaware filing this morning is the opening of a closing sequence. He believes he has enough control of the legal architecture to force through the transfer even without Evelyn's cooperation. He'll move to the next step within days, possibly hours. What's the next step? Julian asked. He'll need to demonstrate that the loan agreement is legitimate. That means producing a witness who can attest to Evelyn's knowledge of the agreement. Someone who will claim she knew about the loan, that it was a real arrangement. Margaret looked at Evelyn. Is there anyone in your immediate circle business, contacts, anyone who interacted with the subsidiary documentation who Victor could have compromised? Evelyn thought. She ran through the names. The people who had seen the compliance work. The attorneys, the accountants. She stopped. Marcus Webb, she said. Julian looked at her sharply. Your prior accountant. He handled the transition of the subsidiary books when I took on the compliance role. He had access to every document from that period. He saw the original loan structures, the real ones. She stopped. He left the firm 18 months ago. He said he was starting his own practice. She paused. 18 months ago is when Victor took Celeste to New York. Julian was already on his phone. If Victor has Webb, Margaret said, then he has a witness who can claim knowledge of a loan that never existed. Someone who saw the real documentation and can testify to a distorted version of it. She looked at Evelyn. He can fabricate an evidentiary record. How do we stop that? Adrian asked. We move faster than he does. Margaret stood up. She was already reconfiguring. Evelyn could see it. The mental reorganization of a professional shifting from investigative mode to operational mode. I need to go make calls. I need federal authorization to surveil the Delaware, filing and freeze the petition. I need a warrant for Victor Dane's financial records, which I can get within 24 hours given what you've given me today. She looked at Adrian. You are not under arrest. You are not being charged with anything today, but I need you to remain cooperative and available. No communications with anyone in your organization that I haven't cleared. Understood, Adrian said. And I need you both somewhere Victor cannot predict. She looked at Evelyn. The Philadelphia location is compromised. I know. Do you have somewhere else? Evelyn looked at Julian. Julian looked at his phone. Then he looked up with the expression of a man who has just had an idea he doesn't entirely like, but can't improve on. My sister's house in Connecticut. Victor doesn't know about her. It's not connected to any Voss documentation. It's 40 minutes from the city. Book it, Margaret said. Both of you tonight. She looked at Adrian. Together? A pause. That's not Evelyn started. Miss Vale. Margaret's voice was not unkind. You have a newborn, a compromised location, and a man who is moving to seize 6 corporate structures that have your name on them. The question of sleeping arrangements is significantly less important than the question of security. Evelyn looked at Adrian. He looked back at her. He did not ask. Fine, she said. But Julian stays too. I was already planning to, Julian said. They drove to Connecticut in 2 cars. Evelyn, Mara, and Nolan in the first. Adrian and Garrison in the second, following at a distance that was close enough to be useful and far enough to be understood. The drive was quiet. Mara drove. Evelyn sat in the back with Nolan and her phone and the portfolio and thought about Marcus Webb, who she had trusted, who had seen every document, who had left 18 months ago at the precise moment Victor had begun the final phase of his construction. She thought about Diana Marsh, who had worked beside her in the compliance process, who had asked smart questions and remembered details and been, Evelyn had believed, simply good at her job. She thought about the 4 years of Victor's patience, 4 years of small routed payments and manufactured circumstance and careful positioning, the affair, the photograph, the pregnancy timing, the Delaware filing. Each piece placed deliberately, each piece looking in isolation like a separate problem. Only from a distance did you see they were all the same problem. Thought about something Adrian had said in the conference room that she had not responded to but had not been able to leave alone. He used my worst instincts. He didn't create them, but he made them profitable. The honesty of it had surprised her. Not the content she had known for years what Adrian's worst instincts were. She had them operate. She had accommodated them and sometimes enabled them and told herself the story about working from the inside. What surprised her was that he had said it in that room, with a federal prosecutor listening, with no performance attached. Just the plain statement. Here is what I am. Here is what was done with it. She wasn't ready to do anything with that information. She held it. Outside the car windows, the Connecticut suburbs moved past the October trees, the dark lawns, the houses with their lights on in the early evening. Ordinary contained life. People inside those houses who did not know what was happening in the car moving past them, who were watching television or feeding children or arguing about something small and had no idea that 4 years of patient criminal architecture was currently being dismantled 40 minutes from their front doors. Evelyn looked at Nolan. He was awake. He was looking at the ceiling of the car with the focused intensities of someone who has just discovered that ceilings exist and finds this philosophically rich. You're going to be fine, she told him quietly. He did not look at her. He was thinking about the ceiling. She almost smiled. Julian's sister's house was a colonial on 2 acres, with a mudroom and a dog that hid under the kitchen table when strangers arrived, and a guest room with a crib that Julian had apparently called ahead to arrange. Julian's sister was a woman named Peg who asked no questions, made coffee, put food on the table, and then went upstairs and did not come down. Evelyn had never admired a person more quickly. They set Nolan down. Evelyn fed him. Mara ate standing at the kitchen counter. Garrison sat near the front door and did not eat. Adrian sat at the kitchen table with his document case and his phone and looked at nothing. At 8:15, Margaret called. The federal authorization came through faster than expected, she said. The Delaware petition is flagged. Victor cannot proceed without triggering an automatic review. A pause. Something else came through in the last hour. Evelyn looked at Adrian. Marcus Webb filed a sworn affidavit this afternoon, Margaret said, attesting to the existence of the loan agreement, attesting to Evelyn's knowledge of and consent to the terms. Julian swore quietly. Victor moved today, Margaret said. Simultaneously with the petition. He had Webb ready. He was waiting for us to surface. Another pause. He knew you'd make contact with me. How? Evelyn asked. I don't know yet. Margaret's voice was careful. But he moved within 4 hours of your arrival at that conference room. Either he had the building under surveillance, or someone in the building made a call. Kitchen went very still. Evelyn looked at Julian. Julian looked back at her. His face was doing the careful, controlled work of a man who is running through every call he had made. Every person he had spoken to, every piece of the arrangement he had put in place. The conference room, he said slowly. I booked it through a colleague. Which colleague? Evelyn asked. Julian's face went pale in a way she had not seen on him before. Gerald Fenn, he said. He handles commercial real estate law. He's been a professional acquaintance for 12 years. He stopped. His firm is the registered agent for 2 Delaware holding companies. Pulled out his phone. His hands were not entirely steady. He pulled up the Delaware corporate registry and searched Gerald Fenn's firm. He turned the phone so Evelyn could see the screen. 2 Delaware holding companies. Registered agent, Fenn Commercial Law Associates. One of them was the holding company Victor had used to file the petition that morning. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Julian. Evelyn kept her voice level. You didn't know. He stopped. His jaw worked. He looked at the phone screen and then looked away. 62 years old. 30 years of practice. A man who had built his entire professional identity on knowing which rooms were safe, and he had booked them a conference room in the building of a man connected to Victor Dane's shell structure. You didn't know, she said again. Firmer. Victor's network is 4 years old and professionally constructed. You couldn't have seen it. I should have. Julian. She put her hand on the table. Not on his hand, on the table. A marker, not a comfort. We don't have time for this right now. He closed his mouth, nodded. She picked up her phone. Margaret. Victor knew about the meeting because we used a room connected to his network. That's the answer to your question. He didn't have us under surveillance. He had the building, which means he anticipated you'd surface quickly and positioned accordingly. Yes. She looked at the kitchen, at the dog still under the table, at Nolan in the portable bassinet, at Adrian, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully categorize, but which contained something that was not the management register, and was not the performance, and was something more unguarded than she had permission to examine right now. Where does this leave us? She asked Margaret. It leaves us with a sworn affidavit from a compromised witness, a federal petition in review, and a man who has demonstrated he can move faster than we expected. Margaret paused. It also leaves us with something Victor doesn't know we have, which is Adrian's internal financial records, the complete organizational map, everything he brought to the meeting today. Another pause. Victor knows you surfaced. He knows you're moving. He does not know the full scope of what Adrian gave me this afternoon because the meeting room was wired for audio but not video, and Adrian's document case was not opened until after you had debugged the room. Evelyn looked at Adrian. He nodded slightly. He had checked the room. Of course he had checked the room. 30 years of operating in environments where rooms were never safe. So he knows we met, Evelyn said. He doesn't know what Adrian brought. Correct. Which means we have a window. Not a large one. Margaret's voice was tighter now. I need something Victor won't expect. I need him in a room where he commits to the operation on record, where he moves forward believing he's in control. I need him to make the final play in a location where we can document it and where he can't reverse course. Evelyn understood immediately what Margaret was describing. She felt the shape of it before she had the words for it. You want to set a trap, she said. I want to give him what he thinks he wants, Margaret said. I want to give him Evelyn Vale, apparently alone, apparently frightened, apparently willing to sign the documents to protect her son. Kitchen was very quiet. Adrian stood up. Absolutely not. Adrian. Evelyn kept her eyes on the wall in front of her, thinking, running the logic. You're not walking into a room with Victor Dane with the newborns. Nolan wouldn't be there. She turned to look at him. I would be there, with a transmitter, with federal agents in position outside. She paused. And you would be there, out of sight, as backup. That's not backup. That's the only play that ends this completely. She kept her voice quiet, not hard, not cold. Just clear. Victor needs my signature on those documents. He won't send someone else to get it. He'll come himself because he doesn't trust anyone else to manage me. And when he comes, she paused. He'll talk. He always talks. Men like Victor always talk when they believe they've already won. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. His face was doing the thing again. The unreadable thing that she was beginning to understand was not actually unreadable. That was simply the face of a man who had spent 30 years keeping his expression neutral and was now finding that skill working against him in situations where something real was happening. If anything goes wrong, he said. I know, she said. Evelyn. His voice dropped. If anything goes wrong. I know, she said again, quieter, not soft, but not hard. I know what the risks are. I've been calculating risks in rooms you controlled for 7 years. I know how to do this." He looked at her. He sat back down. "Margaret," Evelyn said into the phone. "I'll do it. Tell me how we build the location." And in the Connecticut kitchen, under the table, the dog finally crept out from hiding and put its head on Evelyn's foot, and she looked down at it and thought, even the dog understands something has just changed. There was no version of the next 48 hours from which everything emerged clean. But there was one version from which everything emerged finished. She was going to find that version and walk straight into it, because the alternative was spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder at a patient man who had already demonstrated he could wait 4 years. She was done waiting, so was he. The difference was she knew it and he didn't. The plan took 36 hours to build and required 3 things Evelyn did not fully control: a location Victor would accept, a transmitter Victor would not find, and Adrian staying out of sight long enough to be useful. Margaret handled the location. It was an abandoned ferry terminal on the Hudson waterfront in Lower Manhattan, a building that had been in a redevelopment dispute for 11 years and existed in the particular legal purgatory of properties that nobody owned cleanly enough to maintain or demolish. Victor's organization had a dormant interest in the redevelopment consortium. The building was technically on his radar. Margaret's team had been using it for a separate surveillance operation 18 months earlier and knew the interior layout down to which doors locked from which side. She chose it because Victor would recognize it as a location where he had some degree of control. A place with exits he thought he knew. That familiarity was the trap. Evelyn chose the transmitter herself, working with a federal tech specialist who came to the Connecticut house on the second morning, a woman in her 30s who arrived with a bag of equipment and spoke in the compressed professional shorthand of someone who had done this enough times. She had stopped explaining things until someone asked. "Standard body wire is what he'll look for," the specialist said. She was laying options on Julian's sister's kitchen table. "He'll have someone sweep you before he lets you near him." "So not a body wire," Evelyn said. "Not on you, no." She picked up something that looked like a small flat button. "This goes in the portfolio. The leather absorbs the scanned signal partially but not completely. If he's thorough, he'll find it." "He'll be thorough," Evelyn said. "Right," the specialist set it down. "So we put 2 in play, one he finds, one he doesn't." She held up a pen. "The one he finds is in the portfolio. Standard enough that it reads as your attempt, unsophisticated enough that finding it makes him feel in control." She set the pen down and picked up something else, a small metal clasp, the kind used to secure leather bag straps. "The one he doesn't find is in the hardware of the bag itself. The clasp is a receiver transmitter. Reads as a standard metal fitting on any scanner." She looked at Evelyn. "He destroys the pen. He thinks he's clean. We have everything on the clasp." Evelyn looked at the clasp. "How long is the range?" "Reliable to 400 meters. Our team will be in a support vehicle at the dock access road. They'll have audio in real time. And if he finds the clasp," the specialist met her eyes. "Then we move to manual backup. Agent Holt's team breaches on her signal regardless of what we have on record." "What's the breach timeline from the dock road?" 90 seconds from signal to entry." Evelyn nodded. She picked up the portfolio and handed it to the specialist. "Put both in." Adrian watched this from the kitchen doorway. He had been watching a lot from doorways over the past 36 hours. It was a new experience for him, the doorway position, the observer position, the position of a man who is present but not directing. He kept catching himself starting to speak and stopping, starting to suggest and stopping. The discipline of it was physical. He could feel it in his jaw, in his hands, in the specific tension of someone holding themselves back from a behavior that is so habitual it barely registers as a choice anymore. Evelyn did not look at him when she handed over the portfolio. She had been precise with him throughout the planning. Not cold he had known cold from her, the controlled management of a woman protecting herself. And this was not that. This was something more like the way a surgeon is precise. Not unfeeling, focused. She spoke to him when she needed his input and listened when he gave it and moved on immediately, without lingering in the exchange. He found it harder to be around than anger would have been. Anger he knew how to navigate. This her competence, her clarity. The way she managed a federal operation from a borrowed kitchen while nursing a 12-day-old infant, this he did not have a practiced response for, and the absence of a practiced response left him standing in doorways, watching and feeling, with a specificity that surprised him. Exactly what he had thrown away. The second morning, while Evelyn was meeting with the tech specialist, Mara found him at the kitchen table with his coffee going cold and sat across from him without asking. She looked at him with the particular directness of a younger sister who has spent 7 years watching her older sister navigate a marriage that required more management than love. "She's not doing this for you," Mara said. "I know," he said. "She's doing it for Nolan, and because she's not the kind of person who walks away from something she can finish." "I know." Mara looked at him. "You have any idea what the last 4 days have been for her?" He looked at his coffee. "She labored alone for almost 3 hours before I got there," Mara said. Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. "She drove herself to the hospital at 4 in the morning because you were in Sicily. She held your son by herself in that room and didn't cry once. Not once, Adrian. And then she spent the next 4 days building a federal case while figuring out how to keep your son safe from a man who's been operating inside your organization for 4 years. She paused. "She's not made of something you have any experience with." "No," he said, "she's not." Mara stood up. She looked at him for one more moment. "Don't make her regret bringing you in." She left. He sat with his cold coffee and the October light coming through the kitchen windows and thought about that. About the specific geometry of regret, how it has a direction, how it points toward the moment of the choice and not the consequence, how standing in the right place after the fact is not the same as having been there when it mattered. He thought about a hospital room in Manhattan and an empty chair and a blue blanket that had cost $14. He thought about what a man has to become to deserve a second presence in a child's life after forfeiting the first. He didn't arrive at any answers, but he stayed with the questions, which was more than he would have done 4 days ago. The meeting with Victor was set for the following evening at 7. Evelyn made the contact herself. A call to Victor's direct line, a number she had used legitimately during her compliance work, and which would read to him as authentic, which it was. He picked up on the second ring, Evelyn. His voice was warm. Genuinely warm, in the way of a man who is pleased to be right about something. "I'm glad you called. I need this to end," she said. She put the right amount of exhaustion in it. Not too much. Victor was too smart for obvious performance, just the precise weight of a woman who has been awake for 5 days with a newborn and a legal crisis, and has reached the edge of what she can sustain. "I need to talk about the documents." "Of course," he said, unhurried. "That's all I've ever wanted. A conversation. Tomorrow evening. Somewhere quiet." "I have just the place," he said, and he named the ferry terminal. She had expected him to name it. Margaret had predicted it. He'll choose a location he thinks he controls, but hearing it still required her to keep her breathing even and her voice level. "Fine," she said, 7 o'clock. "Come alone," Victor said. "I'll bring my portfolio." A slight pause. "Of course." She ended the call. She sat for a moment. Then she went and fed her son and sat in the quiet of the borrowed room and talked to him in the low, steady voice she had developed over the past 12 days, not baby talk, just narration, just the sound of her voice so he would know it across any distance, in any room, regardless of what else was happening around it. "Tomorrow I go into a room with a man who thinks he's already won," she told him. He was looking at the ceiling again, "and I'm going to let him think that for as long as it takes. And then it's going to be over." She looked at him. "And then you and I are going to figure out the rest." Nolan looked at the ceiling. She almost smiled again. The evening of the operation, the temperature dropped 15 degrees in 4 hours. By 6 o'clock, the waterfront was iron cold, a hard wind off the Hudson carrying the particular bite of approaching winter, and the ferry terminal sat at the end of a concrete dock, like something that had outlasted its own purpose and was simply waiting to be told so. Margaret ran the final briefing at 5:30 in a support vehicle parked 2 blocks from the dock access road. 8 agents, 2 vehicles, entry team at the dock road, secondary team on the building's south side. Everyone in position by 6:15. No approach until Margaret's signal. Signal was a word November which Evelyn would work into a sentence if she had the opportunity, or which the tech team would call in if the audio indicated the operation had reached its conclusion, or Evelyn was in immediate danger. "Define immediate danger," Evelyn said. "Physical contact. A weapon produced. A threat to your person that's direct and proximate." Margaret looked at her steadily. "At that point, we don't wait for the word." "He'll have people inside," Evelyn said. "We know of at least 4. We've had eyes on his security rotation for 48 hours. He'll bring the same team he uses for sensitive meetings. They'll be armed. They'll be positioned at the exits." "So we're walking Evelyn into a building with 4 armed men," Adrian said. He was standing at the edge of the briefing. Margaret had allowed him there, and he had been quiet, which had required visible effort. We're walking Evelyn into a building where Victor Dane believes he has 4 armed men, and we have 8 federal agents. Margaret kept her voice even. The arithmetic is not unfavorable. And if Victor deviates from his pattern, then we adapt. Margaret looked at him. Mr. Voss, your role tonight is to stay in Vehicle 2 and remain available. If we need you inside the building, I will tell you. If I do not tell you, you do not go inside the building. Adrian's jaw tightened. Is that clear? Margaret asked. Clear, he said. Evelyn looked at him across the briefing vehicle. He looked back. She held his gaze for a moment, not reassuringly, not coldly, just steadily. The way you look at someone when you want them to understand that you see them clearly and that you are choosing to proceed anyway. He gave the smallest possible nod. She turned back to Margaret. I'm ready. She walked into the terminal at 3 minutes past 7. The building was vast and cold, the ceiling 40 feet overhead. The old ferry docking infrastructure, still in place, rusted iron cleats along the floor, massive chain mechanisms along the far wall, the smell of decades of river water and industrial metal. 3 of the high windows were broken, and the wind moved through them like something with intent. Victor was waiting at a folding table in the center of the open floor. The table had 2 chairs and a document folder on it and a pen. Like a business meeting. Like the most ordinary thing. He stood when she entered. He was in a dark overcoat, his white hair immaculate, his face arranged in the expression she recognized from 100 meetings inside Adrian's world, the composed, almost paternal warmth of a man who has decided the outcome in advance and is simply being courteous while the other party catches up. Evelyn. He extended his hand. You look tired. I have a 12-day-old, she said. She shook his hand. Briefly. Where's Celeste? A slight shift in his expression. Nearby. Celeste stepped out from behind one of the iron pillars to Evelyn's left. She was in a dark coat, too, her face carefully neutral, her eyes moving to Evelyn with something that was not quite apology and not quite warning and contained elements of both. Evelyn had expected Celeste, had prepared for Celeste. What she did with that expectation was nothing. She filed it and moved forward. She counted the exits as she crossed the floor, 4 men. 2 near the main entrance behind her. 1 at the south emergency exit. 1 at the riverside dock door to her right. Victor's standard configuration, exactly as Margaret had predicted. She sat down across from Victor. He sat down. He looked at her portfolio on the table between them. May I? He asked. Help yourself, she said. He opened it. He removed the pen, the obvious transmitter, the one she had put in the outside pocket, where anyone with any experience would look first. He looked at it for a moment. He set it aside. He did not comment on it. He was too smart to comment on it. Commenting would require acknowledging that he'd been looking for it, which would require acknowledging that he considered her a threat, which would undermine the entire dynamic he was managing. She watched him not comment on it and thought, there you are. He was good. He was very, very good. But he had told her something. By finding it and saying nothing, he had told her that he believed that was all she had, that the obvious plant was the whole play, and that finding it made him comfortable. Good. The documents are straightforward, Victor said. He opened the folder on the table. A transfer of your officer interests in the 6 subsidiaries to the Delaware Holding Company. The loan agreement is referenced as the basis. Marcus has provided his affidavit. He looked up at her. I want you to understand that this is not punitive. Once the transfer is complete, your personal legal exposure in any federal investigation is essentially 0. You were a named officer. The organization's activity during your tenure, you had no operational knowledge of that activity. Without these documents, you remain a named officer. With them, you're a private citizen. She looked at the documents. She did not reach for the pen. And Nolan, she said. Nolan is Adrian's son, Victor said. Whatever happens to Adrian's organization is unrelated to your custody arrangement. I have no interest in your child, Evelyn. I want to be very clear about that. He said it warmly. She thought about the text message sent to her borrowed Philadelphia apartment with the correct address and apartment number. She thought about no interest in your child. Tell me something, she said. She kept her voice even. Conversational. The photograph from Sicily. The one that reached me while I was in my 3rd trimester. Did you send it yourself, or did you have someone else manage that? Victor's expression did not change. I don't know what photograph you're referring to, he said. Celeste does, Evelyn said. She looked at Celeste, who was standing 8 feet away, with her hands clasped in front of her, and her face doing the careful work of not doing anything. You released it deliberately. You timed it to land when I was most vulnerable and when Adrian was most isolated. You needed us separated before Nolan was born. She looked back at Victor. Why before he was born specifically, Evelyn? Victor's voice stayed warm. A slight tightening around the eyes, barely perceptible. You've had a very difficult week. You're exhausted. You have a newborn. Let's not turn this into... The subsidiaries I control have a clause, she said. Standing clause in the original incorporation documents, drafted by Diana Marsh. I noticed months ago, asked about, and was told was standard protective language. She paused. It's not standard, it's specific. It states that in the event of a contested transfer, the named officer's interests revert to their spouse's holding company if the officer cannot be located or is unable to respond within 30 days. Victor was very still. The clause was designed for a scenario where I disappeared, she said, where I took Nolan and ran and couldn't be found within 30 days. The transfer would complete automatically. No signature required. She kept her eyes on his face. You didn't need me to sign these documents, Victor. You needed me to disappear. The photograph, the Sicily timing, the crisis in our marriage, you were engineering my disappearance, not threatening me into signing, waiting for me to run. The warmth left his face. It didn't leave dramatically. It simply withdrew, the way a tide withdraws gradually, and then completely, and what was underneath was older and harder, and without any of the courtesy he had been wearing as a working garment. You're smarter than Adrian said, he said. Adrian never thought to say how smart I was, she said. That's a different problem. Victor looked at her for a long moment. He picked up the pen she had left on the table, the obvious one, the transmitter he had found and set aside. He looked at it. He set it down again. You came here without the transmitter running, he said. So we're having a private conversation. Are we, she said. I removed your device when I opened the portfolio. You removed a device, she said. His eyes moved to the portfolio, clasp on the strap. His expression changed to small, rapid recalculation, the kind that happens in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the kind that a man does when he realizes the floor he is standing on has less substance than he thought. He reached across the table and picked up the portfolio, turned it over. His fingers found the clasp. He looked at it. He looked at her. She held his gaze. He pressed the clasp between his fingers, pulled. The clasp's internal mechanism cracked. Not destroyed, damaged. Partially disabled. Partially, she said. Her voice was steady. You got part of it. Enough, he said. We'll see, she said. Stood up. He was still controlled, but the warmth was gone entirely now, and what replaced it was the quality she had known was underneath, all along the patience of a man who had been waiting 30 years for this specific outcome, and was not going to let it dissolve because of a bag clasp. Celeste, he said without looking at her. Take the folder. Victor Celeste's voice. Take it. A pause. Then footsteps. Celeste crossed the floor and picked up the document folder. Victor walked around the table, not toward Evelyn, to her side, slightly past her, looking at the riverside dock door. One of his men moved from the exit position toward the center of the floor. Evelyn's hands were flat on the table. Her heartbeat was doing something she was aware of, and choosing to not be governed by. I want you to understand something, Victor said. He was behind her now. She didn't turn. She kept her eyes forward, on the folding table, on the document folder Celeste was holding. I have spent 30 years building toward this. 30 years inside that organization, watching a family treat their operation like a birthright instead of a construction. Adrian's father was a man who built something real. Adrian is a man who inherited it and called it his talent. He paused. I built the architecture that made it function. Every clean company, every legitimate structure, every compliant subsidiary. I made all of it. Another pause. Your name is on 6 of those structures because I designed the arrangement that put you there. You were always part of the construction, Evelyn. You just didn't know whose construction you were part of. She turned in her chair. She looked at him directly. Then you made a mistake, she said. You built something that required my name. You gave me access to 4 years of your financial architecture. And then you spent 18 months trying to get me out of the way instead of understanding that I was the most dangerous person in your construction. And that the moment I chose to look clearly at what I was part of, you were finished. Victor's face did something. Not fear, she did not think he was capable of fear in the recognizable sense. Something more like the specific expression of a man who has made a calculation error and is processing the magnitude of it in real time. He produced a weapon. It was not dramatic. It was the quiet, practiced movement of someone who has done it before. The coat, the holster, the weapon in his hand, and pointed at the floor. Not at her, not yet, but present in the room as a statement of available options. Evelyn's hand stayed flat on the table. Her breathing did not change. "Sign the documents," he said. "No," she said, Evelyn. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. The patience of 30 years compressed into the word. "I don't want to make this ugly." "I know you don't," she said. "You've never wanted ugly. Ugly leaves evidence. Ugly is what you spent 4 years designing around." She looked at him. "But you're out of clean options, Victor. You've been out of them since I sat down." "Sign the documents and walk away," he said. "I'm offering you that." "You're not offering me anything," she said. "You're asking me to participate in your construction one more time, and I'm done doing that." He raised the weapon. The lights went out. Total darkness. Immediate and complete. The kind that has no ambient light, no adjustment period. Just the absolute black of a building with covered windows and no electricity. Evelyn was off the chair before her eyes could register that the light was gone, moving left, away from where she had been, away from where Victor knew she had been, moving by the layout she had memorized from the briefing schematic. Steps left and 3 forward would put her behind the chain mechanism housing, iron, solid, old enough to stop. A shot. The crack of it in the closed metal space was enormous, disorienting, coming from Victor's position and going past her to the right, where she had been, where the empty chair was. She hit the chain housing with her shoulder, gripped the iron, breathed. Shouting now. Multiple voices, Victor's men moving. Flashlight beams cutting across the floor from the exit positions, disorganized, sweeping. Evelyn. Victor's voice. Not panicked. She could hear him moving. Controlled movement, measured steps. He had a flashlight. "This is not productive." She said nothing. She moved along the chain housing toward the riverside wall, keeping her hand on the iron, feeling the space by memory and touch. Victor's flashlight beam swept the center of the room. A second shot, not from Victor, from the south exit. One of his men firing at something, at a shadow, at the particular paranoia of a trained man in sudden darkness. Then the main doors. The sound of them, heavy industrial doors, the specific crash of forced entry, and then light, real light, multiple sources, flooding in from the dock access road, and voices that were not Victor's men, coordinated voices, particular compressed command language of a team that had rehearsed entry. Federal agents. Down, hands. Evelyn stayed behind the chain housing. She could hear the room happening around her, the agents moving through, the sounds of Victor's men going down, the specific noise of a struggle near the south exit that lasted 4 seconds and ended with a single command and compliance. Then Victor's voice, somewhere near the center of the floor, not shouting. Still controlled Adrian, clear and steady. "I know you're here," silence. "I know you came," Victor said. "You couldn't stay in the car. You never could." Evelyn looked from behind the iron housing. The agent's lights lit the terminal floor. 3 of Victor's men were down compliant, hands visible. Celeste was against the far wall, not resisting, the document folder on the floor at her feet. Agents moved through the space in the organized pattern of a team that knew the layout. Victor was standing in the center of the floor. Adrian was standing 20 feet away from him. He had come in with the entry team. He was not supposed to be inside. He was supposed to be in Vehicle 2, and he had come in with the entry team, and now he was standing 20 feet from Victor Dane, with the agents holding their positions because Victor still had the weapon and the geometry of the room. Produced a standoff that nobody had planned for. Victor's weapon was raised. Not at Evelyn, at Adrian. "You walked in here," Victor said. He sounded almost sad. "After everything. After all of it. You still walked in." Adrian stood very still. "I've watched you make the wrong choice your entire life," Victor said. "Even now, even at the end of everything, you walk into the building instead of staying where they put you." He shook his head, slightly. 30 years. 30 years I waited for you to be the man your father was. You never were. You never even came close. My father," Adrian said, "was a man who trusted you completely." His voice was flat. "I watched you at his funeral," you cried. "I thought it was grief." He paused. "You were already 3 years into the plan. Your father built something worth taking," Victor said. "That's a form of respect." "Lower the weapon, Victor." "Or what? Or I will." Victor looked at him. Something moved in his face, the 30-year patience, the manufactured warmth, the constructed architecture of a man who had built everything including his own expression, all of it stripped now in the agent's lights, leaving something smaller and older and genuinely, irreducibly angry. Prove you haven't changed, Victor said. Prove you're still the man who solves things this way. Adrian looked at him. The agents were positioned. Margaret's voice was somewhere near the door control commands, the operation moving toward its terminal geometry. Adrian raised his weapon. 1 second. 2. Evelyn came out from behind the chain housing. She walked across the terminal floor in the agent's lights, her steps deliberate and even, and she positioned herself not between them, not in the line of fire. She was not making that gesture, but beside Adrian. Close enough that he could see her in his peripheral vision. He could feel her there. She did not touch him. She did not speak. She simply stood. Victor's eyes moved to her, then back to Adrian. She won't save you if you don't act, Victor said. She's not here to save me, Adrian said. His voice had dropped to something almost quiet. She's here because she finished what she came to do. He looked at Victor over the weapon he was holding steady. I'm not here to save anything either. I'm here because my son is going to grow up in whatever I leave behind tonight. He paused. And I'm done leaving behind things I'm not willing to look at. He lowered the weapon. Victor's expression broke. Not dramatically. Just the final withdrawal of a man who had bet everything on a version of Adrian Voss that no longer existed and was only now in this terminal with federal agents closing the distance, understanding that the version he had planned around had been gone longer than he knew. He was still holding the weapon when the agents reached him. He did not fire. Perhaps he had run the calculation and found it insufficient. Perhaps 30 years of patience had simply run out. He let take it from his hand, and he looked at Adrian across the distance, and what was in his face in that final moment was not defeat exactly. It was something more like the expression of a man who has finally arrived at the end of a road he built himself and finds it goes nowhere he intended. Margaret reached Adrian and took his arm, not roughly but firmly, and said something low near his ear that Evelyn couldn't hear from where she stood. Celeste was being walked toward the exit. She turned once and looked at Evelyn with the specific expression of a woman who has made a catastrophic series of decisions and understands the full accounting. Evelyn held her gaze for a moment, then looked away. She walked to where the document folder had fallen from Celeste's hands, and she picked it up off the terminal floor and she held it. The forged loan agreement, Marcus Webb's false affidavit, the transfer documents requiring her signature. She held it for a moment. Then she handed it to Margaret's assistant, who was moving through the floor with an evidence bag. Chain of custody, Evelyn said. The assistant took it, tagged it, moved on. Evelyn stood in the middle of the terminal floor. While the operation completed around her agents moving, Victor being walked out, Margaret speaking rapidly into her phone, the cold river air moving through the broken windows, and she breathed, that in and out. The plan had not gone cleanly. The lights had gone out. A shot had been fired. Adrian had broken position and come inside. The clasp had been partially disabled, and they would need to determine what the audio had captured and what had been lost. None of it had gone the way it was drawn up. But Victor Dane was in handcuffs, and the document folder was in evidence, and Adrian Voss was standing 15 feet away, talking to Margaret, with the expression of a man who had just done the thing that would cost him more than anything he had ever done, and was choosing not to walk back from it. Evelyn looked at him. He looked at her. Across the cold terminal floor, in the aftermath of everything, with agents moving through and the Hudson wind coming off the broken windows, Adrian Voss looked at his wife and did not ask for anything. He simply looked, and she looked back, and neither of them spoke. And outside in Vehicle 2, 3 blocks away, Mara was sitting with Nolan in her arms, and her phone pressed to her ear and her eyes closed, waiting for the word that it was done. Done. Almost the last piece, the piece that would determine what kind of wreckage they were all walking out of, was still ahead. The drive back from the terminal took 22 minutes. Evelyn sat in the back of Margaret's vehicle and did not speak. Outside the windows, lower Manhattan moved past the late-night streets, the lights on the water, the ordinary machinery of a city that had no idea what had just happened inside a building at the end of a dock. She watched it and felt the particular hollowness of a person who has been running on focused adrenaline for days and has now arrived at the moment when the objective is complete and the body doesn't know what to do with that information. Her hands were steady. She checked the way she had been checking things all week systematically, without sentiment, hands steady, breathing even. The portfolio was gone in evidence. The bag with the damaged clasp was in Margaret's assistant's custody. She had nothing in her hands. That was new. For the past 6 days, she had been holding something Nolan, the portfolio, her phone, the thread of the plan. She had not once been sitting in a moving vehicle with empty hands, and nothing immediately required of her. She didn't know what to do with her hands. She folded them in her lap and looked out the window and let the city move past. Margaret was in the front seat making calls. The operation language, the procedural rap, she heard pieces of it. Victor in custody. The Delaware petition flagged for federal review. Marcus Webb's location confirmed. A warrant issued. Diana Marsh, Adrian's compromised attorney, had been picked up from her Upper East Side apartment 40 minutes ago by a separate team, which Evelyn had not known was happening, and which Margaret had apparently arranged without mentioning it. She heard Margaret say Adrian's name. She heard Margaret say voluntary surrender. Morning, my office. She looked at her folded hands. Mara was outside the vehicle before it fully stopped. She had been parked 2 blocks from the terminal access road, with Nolan for the duration of the operation. Her phone pressed to Julian's ear the entire time, getting information in fragments. When Evelyn's door opened, she was already there, and she grabbed Evelyn's arm with both hands and didn't say anything. Just held on for a moment with the grip of someone who has been sitting very still for a very long time, and is only now allowing the fear to move through her body and out. Evelyn let her hold on. Then she said, "Where's Nolan?" "Car seat. He's fine. He slept through the whole thing." Mara's voice was rough. "Of course he did." Evelyn almost laughed. "Didn't quite make it." She went to the car and unstrapped Nolan and held him against her chest and stood on the sidewalk in the cold Manhattan night and breathed. He was warm. He smelled like the particular warmth of a sleeping infant, something sweet and specific that she was already addicted to in the animal way, the way that bypassed thought entirely and went straight to something more fundamental. "Okay," she said quietly, to him or to herself or to neither of them. "Okay," Mara said beside her. They stood there for a moment. The city around them, the waterfront cold. Margaret's vehicle pulling away toward the federal building. Somewhere in the direction of the terminal, a second vehicle was carrying Victor Dane toward a processing facility where he would spend the night and every night after for a long time. Somewhere else in the city, Adrian Voss was in the back of Garrison's car, and Evelyn did not know what he was thinking. And for the first time in a week, she was not required to account for his next move. That too was new. She held her son and stood on the sidewalk and let it be new. The federal proceedings began 8 days later. Victor Dane did not cooperate. This surprised no one. He was 61 years old and had spent 30 years building legal insulation around himself, and even stripped of the documents and the Delaware structure and the false affidavit, even with Margaret's team working through the 4 years of financial records Evelyn had assembled. He sat across from federal prosecutors with an attorney who had nothing to do with the Voss organization and said very little. Didn't matter. The documentation was sufficient. The shell structure, the 4-year extraction, the forged loan agreement, the coordinated movement of the Delaware petition, simultaneous with the Marsh filing it, assembled into a case that Margaret described to Evelyn, in a brief phone call, as cleaner than most things she had taken to trial in 20 years. Marcus Webb, facing his own charges, agreed to a cooperation agreement within 72 hours of his arrest. His testimony would confirm the fabrication of the loan documentation. Diana Marsh took longer 4 days before her attorney advised her that the evidence against her was sufficient to guarantee conviction without cooperation, and insufficient to guarantee leniency with it. Cooperated. Celeste Romano was a more complicated matter. She had made the call to Mara. She had broken from Victor's operation at a critical moment, and that break, combined with the fact that she had been, as she described it in her initial statement, introduced to Adrian by Victor, with a specific operational purpose she had not fully understood when she agreed to. It gave her attorney grounds to negotiate. Evelyn was asked once, by Margaret's office, whether she had any objection to Celeste's cooperation agreement. She sat with that question for a day. Then she said no. She had no objection. She did not elaborate on why. She did not feel required to. Adrian's situation was the most complicated and the least surprising. He had walked into Margaret's office the morning after the terminal with Garrison beside him and his own attorney behind him, and he had sat down and he had answered every question. Every question. The organizational structure from the beginning, the money laundering operations, the years of them, the mechanics, the relationships with people whose names appeared in other federal cases in other jurisdictions, the accounting of what had been done, and how and who had authorized it. He answered questions for 6 days. At the end of the 6th day, Margaret called Evelyn. He refused immunity, Margaret said. His attorney argued for it. He refused. Evelyn was sitting in Julian's sister's guest room, which had become a semi-permanent arrangement while the legal proceedings made returning to New York complicated. Nolan was in the crib. She was on the edge of the bed with her shoes still on and the phone pressed to her ear. "What's he looking at?" she said. "Conspiracy, financial crimes, RICO-adjacent exposure from the organizational history. Cooperation is substantial, and it will be considered. But he's not walking away without a sentence." Margaret paused. "He knows that." "I know he knows," Evelyn said. "Do you want me to keep you updated as the sentencing process develops?" "Yes," she said, "but not every detail, the major decisions." "Understood." She ended the call and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Nolan, who was doing the ceiling thing. She thought about a man in his 40s who had just agreed to dismantle everything he had ever built, including his own freedom, and had done it without asking for anything in return. She thought about what that cost. She did not confuse it with the cost of what he had failed to do. Those were separate ledgers. She had kept them separate her entire adult life, and she was not going to stop now. But she held both. The divorce became final 11 weeks after the night in the terminal. There was no courtroom drama. There was paperwork, and Julian, and an agreed settlement that Evelyn had drafted herself, and Adrian had signed without modification. Full custody to Evelyn. Child support structured to account for Adrian's diminished earning capacity during and after his sentence. His visitation rights suspended during incarceration, subject to review when circumstances changed. She had included one clause that was not standard. It was 3 sentences, and it said that Nolan's relationship with his father was a matter to be determined by Nolan himself as he grew, with Evelyn's facilitation, and that neither party could use the legal framework meant to engineer that relationship in either direction. Adrian had not modified it. He had added nothing to it. He had simply signed. The day the divorce was finalized, Evelyn was in a coffee shop on 18th Street in Manhattan. She had moved back to the city 6 weeks after the terminal, a different apartment, smaller, in a neighborhood that had no association with the 7 years she was no longer in. She had her laptop open and a cup of coffee, and was working on the documentation for the consulting firm. She was building a risk consulting practice focused on corporate compliance and the specific expertise of someone who had spent 7 years inside a powerful organization and understood exactly how the insides looked. She had 3 clients already, 2 more in conversation. Julian had referred the first one. The second and third had come from a former colleague who had read about the Voss case in the financial press and connected Evelyn's name to the coverage with a 2-second search. She was reading a contract clause when her phone showed a notification that the divorce filing had been processed and recorded. She looked at it. She put the phone face down on the table. She picked up her coffee. She finished reading the contract clause. That was how it ended. Not with ceremony, not with grief or relief or any of the large weather systems she had anticipated. During the years she had been half planning for this outcome. Just a notification on a phone in a coffee shop, and a woman who had learned, over the course of a very difficult several weeks, to keep moving forward, because the alternative was standing still, and standing still was never something she had been built for. Adrian Voss entered federal custody 4 months after the terminal. His sentence was 61 months, just over 5 years reduced from the guidelines range, based on the extent of his cooperation and the specific nature of his testimony in the Victor Dane prosecution, which had gone to trial and which had resulted in a conviction on all counts. Garrison drove him to the processing facility. Evelyn knew this because Garrison sent her a text that said only, "He asked me to tell you he went in on time." She understood what that meant, and she did not respond to the text, and she did not tell Mara about it for 3 days. She thought about it, though. She thought about it more than she expected to. The letter started 6 months into his sentence. Not to her. To Nolan, who was 7 months old and could not read, and who would not be able to read for years, and who had no idea the letters existed. Adrian wrote them anyway. Julian received them as the designated intermediary, per the custody arrangement, and confirmed they contained nothing inappropriate, and filed them in a folder that would eventually be given to Nolan at an age determined by Evelyn's judgment. She did not read them. Julian offered once. She declined. What she knew was what Julian told her without being asked. They were consistent. They were regular one, every 3 weeks, and they were not, from what Julian could see, the letters of a man performing remorse for an audience. She kept that in a separate place in her mind, not filed away. Not discarded, just held. She built the consulting firm over the next 2 years, the way she built everything methodically. without drama, with the particular patience of someone who had learned that the things worth having rarely arrived on a comfortable schedule. She hired 2 people in the first year, a third in the second. She turned down 3 acquisition offers from larger firms who wanted her expertise absorbed into their existing infrastructure, and were surprised when she declined, because the offers were good and the logic of accepting them was clear, and she said no anyway. She was done being absorbed into someone else's infrastructure. She wanted to know at the end of each day that the thing she was building was hers. Mara moved to New York permanently that second year, ostensibly for a job opportunity, actually because Nolan had learned to walk, and Mara had decided this was a development she was not willing to observe from a distance. She got an apartment 12 blocks from Evelyn's and showed up 4 mornings a week for breakfast, and was, in the ordinary ongoing way of the best people, simply present. Nolan walked at 11 months. He talked at 14, in full sentences that made Evelyn call Mara immediately and hold the phone toward him so Mara could hear. He was particular about his food, would eat pasta in any form, rejected vegetables, with the decisive certainty of someone who has considered the matter thoroughly and reached a firm position. He had Adrian's eyes and Evelyn's hands, and a laugh that belonged to neither of them, that had arrived in the world apparently on its own terms, as its own thing. He slept through the night at 6 weeks, which the pediatrician said was unusual, and which Evelyn chose to interpret as evidence that he had assessed his circumstances and found them satisfactory. She drove to see Adrian once, not for any reason she could fully articulate, not reconciliation, not forgiveness, which was a transaction she had decided early on she was not in the business of. She drove because Nolan was 2 years old and had recently become interested in a man in one photograph, which Evelyn kept in a drawer and had never displayed, but which Nolan had found with the archaeological efficiency of a 2-year-old, and which he had carried to her and held up and said, with the decisive vocabulary of his age, "That man. That man." She had said, "Yes, that's your father." And Nolan had looked at the photograph for a long moment, and then set it down and gone back to whatever he had been doing, and Evelyn had stood in the kitchen with the photograph in her hand, and understood something had shifted in the geometry of the situation, not toward reunion, not toward anything simple, just toward a reality that Nolan was beginning to inhabit, and that she was responsible for helping him inhabit honestly. She called Julian. Julian called Adrian's attorney. The visit was arranged through proper channels, documented, supervised. She drove 3 hours. She sat in a waiting room that smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee, and filled out forms, and then was escorted to a room with a table and 2 chairs and a window that let in good light, and waited. Adrian walked in. He had lost weight. Not dramatically, he was not a diminished version of himself. He looked, if anything, more present than he had in years. Performance had come off. The management register, the control, the careful architecture of how he occupied a room it had been replaced by something simpler and less constructed. And the man it revealed was someone she had met once or twice in 7 years of marriage, and never consistently. He sat down across from her. He looked at her. He waited. "He found your photograph," she said. Something moved in Adrian's face, quick and real and not managed. "He wanted to know who you were," she said. I told him. He filed it and moved on to something else. That's how 2 works. But she paused. "He knows. He's going to keep knowing. And I want him to know something true, rather than something I constructed out of what's convenient." "What do you want to tell him?" Adrian asked. His voice was quiet. Dante took it. The raw he had heard in it on the phone the morning after Nolan was born was different now, not fresh pain, but something that had been lived with long enough to become texture. "I want to tell him the truth in portions he can hold at the age he's at." She kept her hands flat on the table. "That you made choices that had consequences. That you're dealing with those consequences. That you're his father. And when he's older, he gets more of it. All of it, eventually. I'm not going to edit you into something clean. You don't get to be the sanitized version in his mind to protect either of us." Adrian looked at her. "That's fair," he said. "I know it is," she said. They sat for a moment. The room had the particular quality of spaces where important things happen in ordinary furniture, just a table, 2 chairs, the window with its good light. Nothing significant about any of it except the people in it. "How is he?" Adrian said. "Not how does he look, not does he look like me. Just how is he?" she told him. She told him about the pasta and the vegetables and the walking at 11 months, and the talking at 14 and the laugh that didn't come from either of them. She told him about the morning Nolan had walked into the kitchen at 7 a.m. carrying a toy car, and climbed into her lap, and fallen back asleep with the car still in his hand, and she had sat there for 40 minutes not wanting to move. And that had been, she thought, the most ordinary, extraordinary thing she had ever experienced. Adrian listened. He listened in the way she had forgotten he could listen, when he was not trying to manage the outcome of the conversation completely, with his whole attention, not already forming his next sentence while she was still in the middle of hers. He did not cry. He came close. She watched him come close and hold it, and she did not look away, because she had decided on the drive up that she was not going to manage his emotions for him anymore, that if he needed to feel something in this room, he could feel it, and if it was hard to witness, she could witness it anyway. "I'm going to be different when I get out," he said. "I know you're trying to be," she said. "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed, "it's not." He looked at his hands on the table, then at her. "I'm not asking to come back. I want you to know that. I'm not building towards something with you. I know what I lost, and I don't have any illusions about what's possible." "Good," she said. "Simply not cruelly. I just want." He stopped. "I want Nolan to know I came when I get out. I want him to know that whatever I did before, I came." She looked at him across the table. She thought about a hospital room and an empty chair. She thought about a sapphire bracelet on a bed table in a room that had already been emptied. She thought about a blue blanket that cost $14 and the specific decision she had made on the night she drove herself to the hospital. Not a dramatic decision, not a declaration, just the quiet interior rearrangement of a woman who had finally stopped waiting for a man to become what he had promised. She thought about Nolan in his car seat on the drive home from this visit asleep, probably the way he slept in cars, boneless and trusting, with no idea where he had been or what it had cost to arrange it. "Come early," she said. Adrian looked at her. "When you get out," she said. "Whatever the day is, whatever the appointment is. Come early. Arrive before you're expected. Don't bring anything. Don't plan what you're going to say." She held his gaze. "Just come early." His jaw worked. He nodded once. Small. The kind of nod that is made with the whole body, that costs something. Stood up. She picked up her jacket. "I'll send photographs," she said. "Through Julian." "So you have them, thank you," he said. She walked to the door. She stopped. She didn't turn around. "He has your eyes," she said. "He uses them the same way you do when you're actually paying attention. They're the most important tool he has." She paused. "It's not a bad thing to pass on." She left. She drove the 3 hours back with the radio on low, and the late afternoon light changing as the miles went by. The sky doing the particular thing it does in October, when the angle of the sun is low enough to make everything look briefly like a painting of itself. She thought about the consulting firm and the client meeting she had Thursday, and the brief Mara had texted her about a woman in Chicago who needed exactly the kind of help Evelyn's firm provided someone inside a powerful organization, drowning in something she couldn't fully name, who needed someone who had been there to tell her what it looked like from the outside. She thought about Nolan. She thought about the photograph in the drawer. She thought about what she was going to tell him, in portions, over years, as he grew into a person capable of holding more of the truth each time. Not a story designed to protect her or Adrian or anyone. Just the actual sequence of things, what happened, and what people chose, and what those choices cost, and what came after. She was going to tell him that his mother had made choices she was not proud of, that she had accommodated things she should have refused earlier, that she had told herself the story about working from the inside, when the more honest story was that leaving was frightening, and familiar was easier than starting over, and that she had not left until leaving became the only thing she could live with. She was going to tell him that his father had been a man who was genuinely capable of more than he chose, and that understanding why a person doesn't choose what they're capable of is one of the longer and harder educations, and that she could not give him that understanding ahead of schedule. She was going to tell him that the man who had done the most damage to their family was a patient man who had exploited every weakness in the structure, and that what she had learned from that, the thing she was still learning, was that your weaknesses are not private. They are available to anyone paying close enough attention. The only protection against them is seeing them yourself before someone else does. Going to tell him all of it. Not today. Not for a long time. But eventually. Because he deserved the actual version. 3 years later, on a Saturday in October, when the city had its first cold snap of the season, and the park near Evelyn's apartment had gone amber and rust in a single week, she brought Nolan to a bench near the east entrance at 10 in the morning. He was 4 years old. He He was wearing a green jacket that he had picked himself from a rack at the store because he was at the age where every preference was expressed with the complete conviction of a person who has never once been argued out of anything. And the jacket was too big, and he didn't care. Adrian was already there when they arrived. He was sitting on a bench 20 feet away. He stood when he saw them. He had been out for 7 months. He looked like someone who had been somewhere difficult and had not tried to pretend otherwise, a little leaner, a little quieter. Something settled in his face that had not been there before, not performance, just the particular gravity of a person who has spent years with nothing to manage. He had no gifts. He had come early. Nolan looked at him. He was 4, and 4 is an age of pure assessment. He looked at Adrian with the direct, uncomplicated attention of someone who has not yet learned to disguise his evaluation. "That man," Nolan said to Evelyn. "Yes," she said. "That's your dad." Nolan looked at him for another moment. Then he looked at Evelyn. "From the picture." "From the picture," she said. He looked back at Adrian. Adrian was watching him with an expression that Evelyn had never seen on him before and would not have had words for before Nolan was born, and had no trouble naming now. It was the expression of someone encountering something they do not deserve and are not going to pretend otherwise, and are going to be grateful for anyway. Nolan walked toward him, not running. Walking with the considered gait of a 4-year-old covering ground he has decided to cover. Stopped 3 feet away and looked up at Adrian with the green jacket too big on his shoulders. "Hi," Nolan said. "Hi," Adrian said. His voice had almost nothing in it. Almost. "Do you know how to do swings?" Nolan asked. Adrian's jaw moved. He looked at Evelyn once, just once, not asking permission, not asking for a signal, just a look that contained everything and requested nothing. She gave him nothing back. Just her steady gaze and the slight, minimal nod that said, "Go ahead." "Yeah," Adrian told his son. "I know how to do swings." "Okay," Nolan said, with the efficient acceptance of someone who has gotten the information he needed. He turned and walked toward the swings without checking whether Adrian was following. Adrian followed. Evelyn sat on the bench. She watched her son climb into a swing with the determined athleticism of 4-year-olds everywhere, and she watched Adrian position himself behind him. And she watched the first push tentative, too gentle, overcorrecting for fear. And she watched Nolan turn and say something she couldn't hear, and she watched Adrian push again. Better this time, and the swing go out and come back, and go out. She sat with her hands in her jacket pockets, and the October sun on her face, which was not warm enough to be warm, but was present, which was its own thing. She was not happy in the simple sense. This was not a simple situation, and it did not resolve into something simple. The divorce was real. The years were real. The empty chair in a hospital room on a rainy October morning was real, and it would always be real, and no amount of present tense correctness could undo the specific weight of it. But she had built something. She could see it from where she sat, the consulting firm, the apartment that was hers, the sister who showed up 4 mornings a week, the son in the green jacket going back and forth on the swing with his father's hand sending him forward. She had built it from the wreckage of 7 years, using the skills she had developed inside the wreckage, which was the particular irony of surviving. Something that the thing that almost finished you is also the thing that taught you exactly how to begin again. She watched the swing go out, come back, go out again. Nolan laughed. She could hear it from the bench, the laugh that belonged to neither of them, that had arrived in the world on its own terms, conducting itself according to its own logic. She closed her eyes for a moment, just a moment. The sun on her face, the sound of her son, the cold October air she breathed in, she breathed out. When she opened her eyes, the swing was still going, and Adrian had figured out the right amount of force, and Nolan's voice came across the park with the pure carrying quality of a child who has no idea how far sound travels and no reason to care. "Higher," he said. And Adrian, who had once said not yet and lost everything, pushed his son higher into the October air without hesitation, without calculation, without anything except the simple act of being there, which was the only thing that had ever been required of him. It had taken him longer than it should have. But he was there now, and this time he had come early.